Chapter 729. The road home was always so long and there were always obstacles. When the Empress and her entourage arrived at the post station 14 miles north of Chang'an, they were stopped again. This time the ones who stopped them were not eunuchs, nor were there any soldiers. It was a dozen white-haired ministers. Those old officials knelt in front of the Empress' carriage, representing His Majesty and the kingdom's supervisor to pass on the edict, asking the Empress not to enter the city for now and to stay in the West Mountainside Palace. Looking at the scene in front of him, Ning Ke could not help but admire Li Yu. In the past few years, many old ministers had passed away due to illness. He did not know where she had found so many old and virtuous ministers whose bodies were like rotten wood. Among these old ministers kneeling on the ground, he even saw the former teacher of the sixth prince. The old ministers wept, their white hair fluttering in the autumn wind. It truly made those who saw it sad and those who heard it shed tears. They spoke of the perilous situation of the world and the difficulties of the country. They spoke from the bottom of their hearts and spoke from the bottom of their hearts. The commander of the Northern Army, who was responsible for escorting the Queen and her entourage, was in a dilemma. These old men did not do anything, nor did they issue a decree. They just knelt in front of the carriages. The commander could not really kill them. Ning Ke didn't care about this and walked toward those elders. At this time, people in Chang'an already knew that apart from the cavalry of the Northern Army, Ning Ke, Mr. 13 of the Academy, was also escorting the Empress and the sixth prince back to the south. Eunuch Chen's tragic experience on the stone bridge in Liangxiang proved that Ning Ke had a heart of stone and was cold-blooded and heartless. He would not be restricted by the red tape of the imperial court. Therefore, when they saw him walking over, the elders who were crying and persuading the Empress were shocked and even stopped crying. The leader of the group was Wei Jiechen. He was the oldest and had the most experience. Last year he was invited by His Majesty 3 times to return to Chang and to take over the position left by Chancellor Jin after he passed away. Old Chancellor Wei Jiechen stood up, looked at Ning Ke and scolded, "What are you going to do?" Ning Ke said, "Don't you know what I did in Liang village?" The old chancellor took out a piece of paper from his sleeve and carefully spread it out as if it was the most precious treasure. He held it up in front of him and solemnly said, "Look at what is written on it." That piece of paper had already turned yellow. It was unknown how old it was. A line of words was written on the paper. The disciples of the academy are strictly prohibited from interfering in court affairs. Ning Ke found that it was the headmaster's handwriting and could not help but be startled. The old chancellor shouted, "Kneel before the headmaster of the academy's ironclad rule." Ning Ke looked at him as if he was an idiot. The old chancellor saw that he didn't move and his expression became extremely ugly. He said, "Don't tell me you dare to disobey your master's order." Ning Ke snatched the yellow paper and tore it into 4 halves. He then crumpled them into a ball and threw them into the paddy field beside the state highway. Everyone was stunned. Even the Empress, who was sitting in the carriage, was shocked speechless. The disciples of the academy are best at defying the orders of their masters. Ning Ke looked at the old chancellor and said. The old chancellor had never seen such an arrogant person. Trembling with anger, he pointed his finger at Qin Haodong's face and said sadly, "How can there be such a disrespectful person like you in the Tang Empire?" Really angering this old man to death. "I only tore the note that teacher Zhang casually wrote. That person in the palace even changed his father's posthumous edict. Why didn't I see old chancellor die from anger? Or are you angry because you no longer have my ink brush in your hands? If you want it, I can bring you one from the academy in 2 days, or I can write one myself. My handwriting is better than my teacher's." Ning Ke said calmly without any mockery on his face. However, because of this, his words seemed even sharper. The old chancellor withdrew his finger and clutched his chest. He panted painfully and said intermittently, "You villain! Even if the headmaster is in heaven, he won't forgive you." Ning Ke shouted, "That old guy left us and went to heaven. Do you think he can still control me? If you have the ability, call him down from heaven. I will thank you for the rest of my life." "Enough," the Empress said in the carriage. "Don't make things difficult for the old man. Don't you see that he is uncomfortable?" Ning Ke said calmly, "Then hurry up and die from anger. Then he won't feel uncomfortable anymore." There was an uproar. The officials were furious. They stood up with their old bodies and supported the old chancellor who was on the verge of collapse. They scolded the Empress repeatedly. No one knew where they learned their temper from, but they would rather die than let the Empress' carriage pass. Ning Ke's hand fell on the hilt of his knife. The Empress suddenly said, "I will rest at the post station for a day." Ning Ke understood what she meant and said, "Then I will go to Chang'an first." He turned over and mounted the horse, ready to leave. The imperial court could use all kinds of methods to stop the empress from returning, but no one in no way could stop him. The old officials saw that the situation could not be reversed. They stood by the road and scolded him for being heartless and not seeing the big picture. Ning Ke stopped his horse and turned to look at the old officials. He said, "The world has not seen my coldness. Take care of yourself. You will slowly see it in the future." The West Hill Divine Palace army had already arrived at the Verdant Canyon. Master Chi Mei had already arrived at the Western Army Commander Camp. The cavalry of the Golden Palace continued to move south. The eastern border of the Tang Empire was about to become a scorched land. It was a time of crisis. Ning Ke carried a padao on his back in a wooden box. He walked into Chang and under the setting sun. Note: the imperial study was the place Ning Ke was most familiar with in the palace. He looked at the paperweight on the table and found that there was a crack on it. He put the wooden box on the table and patted it. He said, "Your Majesty, we are back." In this room, he saw His Majesty write, "The flower blooms on the shore," so he wrote, "The fish jumps over the sea." From that moment on, he had a very close relationship with the palace. Chang'an was the god-stunning array. This array was given to him by Master Yen Sei, but it was actually His Majesty's intention. It was related to the safety of the country, so the final decision should be made by the emperor. In other words, His Majesty had entrusted Chang'an and the Tang Empire to him a long time ago. Ning Ke had been growing over the years, but he was still far from being able to take on such a heavy responsibility. He thought that he had a lot of time, but he did not expect the headmaster to leave first and His Majesty to leave so suddenly. Therefore, this heavy responsibility fell on his shoulders in advance. The door of the imperial study was pushed open. Liu walked in looking a little haggard. She looked at the wooden box on the table and slowly knelt down. Ning Ke stood at the side and looked at her quietly. After a long time, Liu stood up. Her eyes were slightly red and she looked even more haggard and tired. Ning Ke said, "If His Majesty is still alive, he must be very disappointed with you." Liu smiled. Her smile was very sad. She said, "What about you? Are you also very disappointed?" Note: this is Gulong. It seems that there is such a scene in every book of mine. The male protagonist always carries a box or a box into a certain city. Is that the murderous aura of a battle of life and death? And then there is more today. To be continued. If you like this work, please come to Chidian.com to vote for me. Your support is my greatest motivation. Chapter 730. It was quiet in the imperial study. Ning Ke was silent for a long time and then said slowly, "Disappointment is inevitable, but it is not hopeless yet." Liu smiled. Compared with her previous pitiful smile, this smile was more self-deprecating. She said, "This is really beyond my expectations. I thought you had completely given up on me. From Wuzhou to Chang'an, including when I entered Chang'an, you did not use the army." Ning Ke looked at the red walls of the palace and said, "I appreciate this. Or perhaps you have no army to use now, and I have misunderstood you." Liu said, "No matter how difficult the situation is, when it comes to life and death, even if I have to squeeze, I can squeeze out some troops. You know my temperament, I will always leave some cards for the last." Ning Ke said, "In fact, I really hope that you can use those cards." Liu asked, "Why?" Ning Ke said, "In that case, I can wash away those cards of yours, and I can kill you the first time I see you without any psychological barriers." Liu said softly, "Why do you want to kill me the first time we meet? Because I tampered with Father's edict? Or is it because you found out that I am not the kind of person you imagined and are disappointed, so you are angry? Although you quietly listened to my fairy tale for a whole night by the bonfire, I have never regarded you as a princess in a fairy tale. How could a woman who married into the wilderness and returned safely be a simple person? I am not disappointed in this aspect, so I will not be angry because of this." Ning Ke said, "As for tampering with the edict, it may seem rebellious in the eyes of others, but I really don't care. My coldness and reality are far beyond what you and the world can imagine. If you can really make the Tang Empire flourish after you help Li Huiyuan seize the throne, and the people live happily, then maybe I will support you. But the reality is not like that." Listening to his words, Liu's eyes gradually brightened. She looked at him and said seriously, "You promised before that in this matter, you will support me." Ning Ke said, "Wrong, I promised you that I would not support the Empress." Liu said, "Then what are you doing now? Why did you bring that woman and her son back to Chang'an? What do you want to fight for her?" Ning Ke said, "You are wrong again. I support His Majesty's last wish." Liu looked a little lonely. After a moment, A determined expression returned to her face. She said, "This is the Li family's business after all. It's not up to you and the academy to interfere." Ning Ke said, "This is the third time you have said something wrong today. First of all, the Tang Empire does not belong to the Li family. It belongs to the Tangs. Secondly, the headmaster of the academy founded the Tang Empire 1,000 years ago. Even if it belongs to someone now, it should belong to the academy." Li Yu frowned slightly. For thousands of years, Chang'an has never been breached. If it was breached, it would be the people in the city who let it be. I can understand that you and Li Huiyuan want the throne, but you chose the wrong time and the way you chose was terrible. As I said before, this is what disappoints me the most." Ning Ke said. Li Yu stared into his eyes and said with a trembling voice, "In this situation, who do you think can do better than me? You, or that woman?" "I know what you mean. In your opinion, the Tang Empire has no chance of winning if the whole world fights against the Tang Empire." Ning Ke said, "But it is normal that we are not as smart as the enemy and not as powerful as the whole world. But some mistakes should not be made. For example, Su Shi should not have died. Many soldiers should not have died." Thinking of the tragic scenes he had seen on his way back to the south and the silent city of Wei, he was silent for a moment and then continued, "Since I killed people in the woodshed when I was a child, I became selfish and cold. I did not care about anyone except Sang Sang. It was not until I went to the city of Wei that I changed. Then I entered the academy. Some changes have been quietly happening in my heart, but I did not notice it. The year before last, on my way to the Lank Temple, I saw the wilderness in the south of the Tang Empire. The scenery there was beautiful and the people there were good. The Tang Empire is really a good place. I like it and I do not want it to be hurt. But now it's severely injured and it's even dying." Ning Ke looked at her and said, "I believe that many stupid mistakes are not made by you, but by him. So I want to know how he is going to bear the responsibility." Li Yu clenched her fists and trembled slightly. She did not speak. Ning Ke looked into her eyes and asked again, "Where is the prince?" Li Yu said in a hoarse voice, "His Majesty is resting." The two of them addressed Li Huiyuan differently, which meant that they had different attitudes. The imperial study fell into silence again. Ning Ke suddenly said, "Let him abdicate first. We will talk about other things later." Li Yu shook her head and said, "I cannot let His Majesty abdicate because that means death." Ning Ke said, "Now many people know who His Majesty passed the throne to. You and your brother cannot continue to lie." Li Yu said coldly, "You do not have a posthumous edict, and the edict from the West Hill Divine Palace clearly states that the woman is a remnant of the devil's doctrine. How many people in the imperial court and the military will support her?" Ning Ke said, "You know me. I do not care how many people support me. I only care how many people oppose me." "Then you will kill all those who oppose you? You do not care that the entire Tang Empire will fall into division because of your actions, and no longer have the power to resist foreign enemies?" Li Yu sneered and said, "You said that you do not despair because I did not use the army to deal with you. Then you should know why I did not do so. I am my father's daughter. No matter how much I want to kill that woman, I do not want the Tang Empire to fall into internal strife in the current situation. What about you?" Ning Ke was silent. Li Yu looked into his eyes and said in a pleading tone, "The Tang Empire cannot be divided now. There cannot be internal strife. Otherwise, no one can bear the terrible consequences. The only way now is for you to stand up and support me and my brother. As long as the Tang Empire can be reunited, with the support of the Academy, maybe we can really turn the tide." Ning Ke frowned slightly and said, "Have you ever thought about it? You and your brother can lead the ministers and the army loyal to you to pledge loyalty to the Empress and the Sixth Prince? Then what should we do in the future? That woman will definitely kill us. And don't forget, she is from the devil's doctrine. Even if I speak up, many ministers and generals will not support her." Li Yu said, "I know you are not reconciled and you are very angry. But I have severely punished His Majesty. Tomorrow the imperial court will issue an edict of self-condemnation. Severely punished? How many slaps?" Ning Ke looked at her and said sarcastically. Li Yu was greatly stimulated by his expression and cried, "I only have this brother. I raised him with one hand. How can I watch him die? I let you into Chang'an and took the risk to let you speak to the palace just to beg you to let him go. Can't I do that too?" Ning Ke looked at the tears on her face and suddenly remembered the past many years ago. If not for Li Yu, he would have returned to Chang'an, but he might not have been able to enter the academy. Without her help, it would not have been so easy to get the stamped document from the ministry. From a certain point of view, This beautiful woman in front of him changed his and Sang Sang's lives. Li Yu said with tears in her eyes, "Think about Sang Sang. She was raised by you. No matter how big a mistake she made, do you have the heart to let her be hurt? I am the same as her sister. So you have always loved Sang Sang." Ning Ke said thoughtfully. The long night passed and morning came. The chaos in Chang'an had gradually calmed down. The smell of incense and candles wafted through the morning fog and many ministers could be seen. Today was not the day of the grand court meeting, but it was held. Everyone knew why. It was because the Empress and the sixth prince had returned and were outside Chang'an. Some ministers even knew that Mr. 13 of the Academy, Ning Ke, was in the palace and had a long talk with Her Highness the Princess. As for the content of the talk, it was obvious. At this time, the Tang Empire was facing a very serious situation. In contrast, the authenticity of the edict and the ownership of the throne were really not important. Just as Li Yu had predicted, from the Prime Minister to the ordinary people in Chang'an, everyone only hoped that the two sides could reach an agreement as soon as possible and not let the Tang Empire fall into civil strife. After confirming that Ning Ke and Her Highness the Princess had talked for a long night, the officials finally calmed down a little. There was no bloodshed in the palace, which meant that at least this matter could be discussed. Even those officials of the Empress's faction who had survived the chaos caused by He Mingqi stood straighter than usual and looked more solemn. However, they still kept their silence rationally. They believed that even if the Academy could not let the sixth prince ascend the throne, they could at least fight for enough compensation for the Empress and the sixth prince. They could also explain what had happened that day. The grand court meeting officially began. After confirming that his royal sister had convinced Ning Ke, Li Huiyuan walked out of the heavily guarded side hall and sat on the cold imperial chair. His face was a little pale. Behind the imperial chair was a bead curtain. Li Yu sat quietly behind the curtain. The ministers in the hall looked between the bead curtain and the imperial chair. Ning Ke, who was wearing a black academy robe, stood on the golden brick floor in silence. A eunuch opened the court meeting. The emperor began to read out his own edict. Then, to everyone's surprise, the emperor walked down from the imperial chair and knelt to the ministers in the hall, kowtowing to them. The ministers were shocked and speechless. They hurriedly knelt back. The emperor kowtowed to the people outside the hall and apologized to the Tang army and people. Finally, he knelt to Ning Ke, who was beside the imperial chair, and asked for the Academy's forgiveness. For thousands of years, no Tang emperor had ever knelt and apologized in the court meeting. Not to mention the ministers who were loyal to Li Yu and her brother were moved to tears. Even the officials of the Empress's faction felt the emperor's sincerity and looked a little better. The bead curtain made a sound and Li Yu walked out from behind it. She bowed to the officials in the court and said, "I only have this one brother. As his elder sister, I will bear the responsibility for the mistakes he has committed. When the war is over, I will give the Tang army and people an explanation. His Majesty will make the sixth prince the emperor's younger brother. Mr. 13 will go out of the city and report to the Empress Dowager later." In the current situation, in order to avoid the division of the Tang Empire and prevent the ministers, soldiers and people in the court from choosing between the two factions, this was undoubtedly the most appropriate arrangement. The hall resounded with the praises of the ministers, and the content of their speech was nothing more than this. At this moment a voice rang out. Thus the entire hall became extremely quiet. Because the person who spoke was Ning Quebec, "You said you only have one brother." He looked at Li Yu and said, "Actually, you are wrong." Li Yu was a little confused. She did not know why he suddenly said this. "You have two brothers?" Ning Ke said. Then he pulled out the padao behind him and slashed at Li Huiyuan. With a crisp sound, Li Huiyuan's head was separated from his body. Fresh blood spurted out from the wound, reaching the ceiling of the hall before falling down powerlessly. The golden brick floor of the hall was covered with blood. Ning Ke looked at Li Yu and said, "Now you only have one brother." There was dead silence in the hall. No one could believe what they were seeing. After a long time, a minister let out a heart-wrenching cry. Several old ministers fainted directly. 8,000 years after the founding of the Tang Empire, Li Huiyuan was the emperor who reigned for the shortest time. He was also the only emperor who was killed in the palace. Of course, only Ning Ke knew that Emperor Taizu was also killed by the headmaster in the palace. His Majesty was beheaded at the grand court meeting. This bloody scene, this shocking and indescribable truth, caused everyone to be dumbfounded. Li Yu's face was pale and bloodless. She looked at her brother who was lying in a pool of blood and fell down. Ning Ke took out a white handkerchief from somewhere and wiped the blood on the padao. Then he looked at the ministers who were still in a state of extreme shock and said, "Just now, I heard a lot of things from you, such as choice and unity. You are very worried, so I will help you solve your worries. His Majesty is now dead, so the former emperor only has one son left. The throne can only be inherited by him, unless His Highness is also interested in the throne." Ning Ke looked at Prince Li Peiyin, who was standing at the head of the line of nobles. Li Peiyin's face was extremely pale and he did not hear what Ning Ke said. "You are afraid of division, afraid of civil strife, afraid of making a choice that will make the current situation more serious. Then now you don't have to make a choice, nor does the entire Tang Empire." Ning Ke put the padao back into the sheath and looked at the ministers in the hall. Finally he said, "There is no need to choose. This is what I think the Tang Empire needs most now, and I will work with all of you. Not today, but there is a separate chapter. To be continued. If you like this work, please come to Chidian. Come to vote for me. Your support is my greatest motivation." Chapter 731. There was dead silence in the hall. No one answered Ning Ke's words. It didn't mean that his words were powerless. In fact, his words were like countless muffled thunders exploding in the minds of the ministers, leaving everyone in a state of confusion. A minister stepped out of the line and pointed at him with a trembling finger, wanting to scold him for his cold-blooded and shameless behavior. Ning Ke looked at the man quietly without any emotion on his face. The minister's finger finally drooped down powerlessly. His lips kept trembling with anger, but he still didn't say a word. Since the tampering of the edict was exposed, the Tang court had been divided into two factions. The empire was about to be destroyed, so the division and hostility were forcibly suppressed. Many ministers used the overall situation to persuade themselves to ignore the edict for the time being, to avoid the Tang Empire officially falling into the mire of civil war. However, who would have thought that when Ning Ke entered the palace and talked with Her Highness for a long night, just when everyone thought the situation was under control, he killed His Majesty. Extreme fear and anger, and then these experienced ministers calmed down at an unimaginable speed. They were shocked to find that, as Ning Ke said, this was actually the best result. His Majesty was killed, and the bloodline of the former emperor was only left with the sixth prince. What other choice did the civil and military officials have except to support him to ascend the throne? These officials, the soldiers fighting in the front line, and the people who would eventually know that the edict was tampered with would no longer have to choose sides, and the Tang Empire would no longer be divided. Not having to choose was the best choice. In fact, everyone knew this truth, but not everyone could make this decision for the Tang Empire. Only Ning Ke could do it because only he dared to do it. Tampering with the former emperor's edict was treason, and anyone could be punished. Even the new emperor and Her Highness couldn't escape the judgment of the law of the Tang Empire. However, such a thing really happened in reality. Who dared to punish them at will? Only Ning Ke didn't give any chance for Li Huiyuan to explain or beg. He didn't give anyone time to think before he chopped down. It was to punish for disobedience. This simple movement showed his extremely calm and even cold way of thinking. It represented the Academy's extreme disregard for the imperial power of the Tang Empire, which made people shudder. What else could the ministers and generals of the Tang Empire do now? Ning Ke's seemingly rebellious behavior could be found in the law of the Tang Empire. Who dared to accuse him of assassinating the emperor? The most critical question was, even if someone thought so in the current situation, who would dare to anger the Academy, the last mountain of the Tang Empire? The officials looked at Ning Ke beside the throne and the corpse of His Majesty in the pool of blood. The expressions on their faces were extremely complicated, including anger, sadness, confusion, vigilance, and fear. Still, no one responded to Ning Ke's words. The deathly silence persisted, because their emotions were too agitated, and because they found it very difficult to accept that the great Tang had been suppressed by a cold-blooded and tyrannical blade. The Academy was not allowed to meddle in politics. This was the iron rule left by the headmaster of the Academy. So what was happening now? At this moment, the Empress walked into the hall with the sixth prince in hand. The officials in the hall were shocked again. They all knew that the Empress and the sixth prince were stopped outside Chang'an by the princess. When did she enter the city and the palace? Why didn't I hear anything? The Empress did not dress up. She still wore a plain dress and looked calm. She had been the Empress here for nearly 20 years. How could Chang'an stop her? How could she not enter the palace? The sixth prince was also dressed in plain clothes, but there was a bright yellow belt around his waist. He followed his mother and looked at the bloody scene deep in the hall. His little face became abnormally pale. He felt that his legs were a little weak and his hands began to tremble. However, he did not dare to slow down or show any signs of retreat as he was held tightly by the Empress. The Empress continued to walk into the hall with the sixth prince towards the throne. The officials in the hall only reacted now. The officials who had always been loyal to the Empress knelt down as fast as they could. They were so excited that their faces were red. The officials under Li Yu's faction gradually knelt down as well, but their expressions were still a little angry. The Empress led the sixth prince around the pool of blood in front of the throne and the body that was separated from the head. Ning Ke moved slightly to the side and made way for them. The Empress glanced at Li Yu. At this time, Li Yu was extremely sad and angry. She was distracted and did not respond at all. The Empress carried the sixth prince to the high throne and sat him down. Then she looked at the officials in the hall and said calmly, "What are you still doing? Is the Tang Empire now celebrating peace and prosperity? Military Ministry, submit the latest battle report first." Dozens of guards were vigilantly watching the surroundings for any movement. The mansion behind them was quiet and not a sound could be heard. It was completely different from the lively atmosphere in the past when Princess Li Yu was recruiting famous scholars and virtuous officials. The most loyal grassland guards around Li Yu had been in the Yulin Royal Guards for many years. When they heard that there was a change in the palace, they tried to attack the palace but were suppressed by the Yulin Royal Guards. Many of them died in the battle. Peng Yutao, the deputy commander who did not leave Chang and with the valiant cavalry battalion, was subdued and sent to the prison of the military ministry before he could do anything. These were all people Ning Ke knew. Many years ago, on the journey from the city of Wei to Chang, he had gone through life and death with those grassland men and Peng Yutao. However, after so many years after hearing this news, he only fell silent for a moment and did not think about it anymore. All the metal objects and sharp objects in the bedroom, even the bronze mirror, had been moved out. Countless soft bedding had been spread everywhere. Even if one wanted to smash into the wall and die, it would be very difficult. In less than half a day, Li Yu's face became extremely thin and pale. She looked very weak and could fall at any time. Her clear eyes seemed to be covered with a layer of frost. There was no luster and a piercing coldness in them. She looked at Ning Ke and said in a trembling voice, "I didn't expect you to lie to me. If you were talking about the last conversation in the Imperial study, I didn't lie to you. At that time I just kept silent. You said that no matter what Sang Sang did, I could not bear to hurt her. You were right. I can understand that you can't bear to hurt Li Huiyuan. But understanding and agreeing are two different things." Ning Ke looked at her and said, "Your love and sadness for him have nothing to do with me. Just like how I love Sang Sang, it will not be recognized by the world. Moreover, I don't like your brother." Li Yu stared at him and said with hatred, "But have you ever thought that you killed my father's son? Would my father really agree to you doing this? Then have you ever thought about why no one has ever been able to kill a member of the Li royal family in the palace for thousands of years? Yes, it is because the God-stunning array has always been protecting the palace. Just now in the main hall, when I chopped down with my knife, the beasts on the eaves of several halls in the palace all reacted. But their aura was forced to restrain after they recognized me." Ning Ke looked at her and said calmly, "Why? Because His Majesty gave me the God-stunning array in Chang, and, which means he gave the lives of all the Li family members to me for me to deal with." Li Yu's body trembled slightly and her face became paler. "I see. So father would rather believe in the academy than us children." In his eyes, only the academy is the true protector of the Tang Empire. She looked at Ning Ke and said sarcastically, "The Tang Empire is about to be destroyed, but the academy does not move and hides in the mountains like a timid mouse. I wonder if father regrets his choice?" The expression on Ning Ke's face did not change at all. He said, "This is where you are not as good as the Empress. She will never doubt His Majesty's decision. Moreover, she has personally experienced the headmaster and the academy. Therefore, even if she and I have a deep grudge, she chose to believe me without any hesitation or reservation. Only those whose eyes are covered by leaves will not be able to see the back of the mountain of the academy. Only then will they really think that the academy will choose to hide out of fear. Even though I do not know the specific situation, I can tell you now that my senior brothers and sisters are definitely preparing to fight for the Tang Empire and the academy." Li Yu lowered her head and did not speak. She did not know if she would believe Ning Ke's words. Ning Ke did not care about this. He looked at her and continued, "My purpose of returning to Chang and is naturally to fight. I want to calm the chaos in Chang and as soon as possible and ensure that there is no problem with the God-stunning array. Then I will get the array I pestle. As long as I can do this, no matter how powerful the West Hill Divine Palace is, they will not be able to attack. He talked about his plan very seriously as if he was explaining it. However, there was no need to explain it to Li Yu at this time, so it seemed a little strange. I said all this to tell you that the Tang Empire will not be destroyed. Ning Ke looked into her eyes and saw the unlucky grayness in them. He continued to try to dispel her will to die. He said coldly, if you want to take revenge on me or the academy, you need to live first. Li Yu's eyes finally had some luster. At this time, she had already guessed Ning Ke's intention and asked, why do you want me to live? If you are alive, the ministers and troops loyal to you and Li Huiyuan will be more stable. The military orders and political affairs of the imperial court can be carried out more efficiently. At this critical moment, I will not let go of any favorable factors. So I need you to be alive and continue to contribute your strength to the Tang Empire. Ning Ke said. Li Yu stared into his eyes and said coldly, you can put it in another way. Ning Ke said, the Tang Empire needs you to live now? I don't think this kind of verbal embellishment has any meaning at this time. Your Highness is smart. It is good that you understand what I mean. Li Yu's body trembled slightly, as if she was looking at a complete stranger. She said, you are too cold? Ning Ke said, outside Chang and in front of the old people you sent, I said that you have no idea what I am like when I am cold. But as long as you are alive, you will have the chance to see it. A new day has begun. I will continue to work hard. You can vote for the monthly vote that you could not vote yesterday. Bow 80 degrees to express my deep gratitude. To be continued. If you like this work, please come to Chidian. Come to vote for me. Your support is my greatest motivation. Chapter 732. Many years later, in the world's records of that magnificent war, the Tang Empire's first counterattack began when Ning Ke escorted the Empress and the sixth prince back to Chang'an and killed Li Huiyuan. But in fact, the Tang Empire's first counterattack did not come from Ning Ke, nor from the northern battlefront army who fought against the Golden Palace. It was not even from Cao Shaoshu who led the valiant cavalry battalion out of Chang and to face tens of thousands of invaders from the eastern border. It was not from the navy who turned the Qinghe River red and vowed not to surrender. It came from a farmer. There was a village in the fertile fields in the south of the Tang Empire. There was a stream next to the village and there was a stone mill by the stream. Opposite the mill was a raised meadow with many grape trellises. The grapes on the trellises had been picked long ago, and only a few undeveloped grapes were left in the same place. They were covered with autumn frost and dust, and looked very inconspicuous. It was a beautiful village, but it was not much different from the villages in the Tang Empire. It looked as inconspicuous as the bunches of grapes hanging under the grape trellises on the grassy slope. There was a farmer named Yang Erxi in the village. Although he insisted that he was a painter in the eyes of the villagers, this plump guy who could use a pitchfork and feed the pigs was, of course, a farmer, and the best kind. Yang Erxi could not refuse this kind of praise, so he could only silently accept it. Like many rural men in the Tang Empire, Yang Erxi had been in the army. He fought with the Yans at the frontier fortress and killed the grassland cavalry. Even his painting skills were learned in the frontier army. In the years after he retired from the army, he married and had children. He earned money to support his family and lived a peaceful and happy life. Except for some common quarrels in every family, there was nothing new and exciting in his life. The tension and ups and downs of his life were all left in the frontier fortress many years ago. Except for meeting a big black horse who liked to eat big grain porridge, there was nothing new and exciting in his life. Sometimes Yang Erxi missed those days in the frontier fortress. One day he was painting the wall of the public school with a bucket of tree paint. Suddenly, a yamen runner walked into the public school, pasted a piece of white paper on the wall, and then left in a hurry. Yang Erxi made a fuss for 2 years, but in the end the yamen still refused to increase the paint fee. He had been beaten up by his old father and harassed by his daughter for a long time, so he had no choice but to agree to paint the public school. He was already in a bad mood and now he was even more annoyed. He thought to himself, can't these guys see that I'm painting? How can I paint with such a big piece of white paper? Of course, he would not admit that what annoyed him the most was that he could not read the words on that piece of paper. The literacy rate of the Tangs was extremely high, but he had been mischievous since he was a child. This did not change even after he joined the army. He would rather be beaten than attend literacy classes, so now he was one of the few illiterates in the village. He was often teased by the children in the neighborhood, which became his biggest regret. Fortunately, after a while, the bell rang in the public school. The people in the village heard the bell and came to listen to the law teacher explain what the court had announced. The law teacher from the public school had not come out yet, but the literate commoners had already understood the contents of the white paper. This was because what was written on it was not a new law, but a battle report. Everyone was silent, and their faces became very ugly. Young Erxi still did not know what was written on it. Looking at everyone's expression, he became more and more anxious. He grabbed a child who wanted to go home to inform his parents, waved his fist, and finally got the answer. The northeast border military was ambushed in the Yen Kingdom and was defeated. There was a lot more in the imperial court's document, especially for the people in the counties and villages in the eastern border. They were requested to evacuate as quickly as possible, and the prefectural armies of each province were to organize defenses on the spot, and men with military experience were to be recruited. No one paid attention to these contents, because they were still a long way from the Yen Kingdom, and those words were not for them to hear. People were just shocked and angry at the failure of the empire, and there was a lot of discussion. Some people worriedly asked if the troops of the Yen Kingdom would attack here, and they were immediately ridiculed. No one believed them at all. Everyone firmly believed that as long as the imperial court sent the army, the eastern border would definitely be fine. Young Erxi had been very silent. After the crowd dispersed, he pulled the law teacher from the public school and seriously asked him about the contents of the imperial court's document. He was not in the mood to paint again, and the county government did not pay him much. When he returned home, he drank wine with half a pot of pig's trotters and a basket of dipped vegetables, and the more he drank, the more depressed he became. His wife squatted outside the doors, scooping out the grape skins and dregs from the wooden barrel, preparing to make wine. Suddenly she found that she had not heard her husband speak for a long time and asked, "What's wrong?" Young Erxi said, "Nothing." His wife said, "You should eat some food. It's not good to drink on an empty stomach." Young Erxi grunted and continued to drink. The more he drank, the quieter he became, but his eyes became brighter. Suddenly he said to his wife, "I'm going on a long trip." His wife raised her head and asked in confusion, "What's wrong?" Something happened in the east. Young Erxi told her the contents of the imperial court's document, and said, "I want to go and have a look." His wife was stunned for a while, and then she laughed, the grape juice in her hand flying everywhere, and mocked, "Something happened in the east. East of your pigsty or the grape trellis. You speak as if the Tang Empire is your home. Are you the emperor or the empress? You're just a farmer." Young Erxi said angrily, "I'm a painter, not a farmer." His wife did not take his words seriously, thinking that he was drunk. She lowered her head and continued to work, muttering, "Every time I drink, I like to talk nonsense." Young Erxi was silent for a moment, and then he said in a low voice, "I'm not drunk. It's written at the back of the imperial court's document that men who have military experience, as long as they are under 40 years old, will be conscripted." Only then did his wife realize that the man was not drunk. She took her hands out of the wooden barrel, wiped them on her clothes, and said nervously, "The imperial court's conscription order is issued to the eastern border. What does it have to do with us? We are close to Chang'an and the eastern border is far away. I'm afraid the imperial court's document will take a few days to arrive. Maybe by then the Yans and those damn barbarians will have already attacked. What's the use of it then? Even if the imperial court wants to conscript, they have to wait for the county government to organize it. Nothing has happened yet." Young Erxi said in a low voice, "But, what's the use of going alone?" His wife said in a trembling voice, "But, what's the use of you going alone?" Young Erxi said, "Even if the eastern border is invaded, the imperial court will definitely set up a wartime yamen there. When I get there, I will naturally go to them." The more his wife listened, the more uneasy she became. She screamed to the next room, "Father, come quickly." Young Erxi slammed the table, and the vegetables and leftover pig trotters all fell to the ground. He said angrily, "What are you shouting for? Why is your voice not so loud when I ask you to call me over for dinner?" The courtyard door was pushed open and a hunchbacked old man came in. Young Erxi stood up and said, "Father, have you eaten?" The old man looked at the mess on the ground, smacked his lips and said, "No." Young Erxi said, "Then let your daughter-in-law chop the leg?" His wife looked at her father-in-law with tears in her eyes. She thought to herself, "I have always been short of your father's food. Last time I didn't ask you to stew the pork leg. You can't be angry because of this. If you can keep this drunk guy at home, let alone the pork leg, I will chop my own leg to show my filial respect to you." The old man did not speak for a long time. Young Erxi was a little nervous. "You are so noisy and there is only a wall between us. How can I not hear you?" The old man said. Young Erxi was very strong and tall, but at this time he honestly lowered his head just like when he made a mistake when he was a child. He mumbled, "I am a retired soldier from the border army. If I don't go now, what's the matter?" Before he finished speaking, the old man glared at him and shouted sternly, "What's so great about being a soldier? Your father, I was also a soldier. I even became a colonel. What are you showing off here?" Hearing this, his wife stopped crying and looked expectantly at her father-in-law. The old man was silent again for a moment and suddenly said, "If you want to go, then go. If I am not 60 now but 40, I will go with you." Young Erxi took out a well-maintained boxwood bow from the compartment. Then he put the sharp and reflective pitchfork on his shoulder. His wife tied a heavy leg of cured pork to the other end of the pitchfork and asked, "Do you want to tie a pot of wine?" Wives in the Tang Empire usually had this kind of temperament. Seeing that they could not change it, they silently accepted it and then began to seriously take care of their men. Yang Erxi said, "We are going to war. Drinking is against military discipline." His wife put down the newly brewed wine, thinking that he was not a proper soldier, so what military discipline was there? At this time the two children ran home. The younger brother was panting and his face was red. He wanted to say something but he could not. The older sister looked at Yang Erxi and said angrily, "Father, the public school is not finished painting, and the teacher is very unhappy. Do you want us to be unable to study and be like you?" If it was a normal day, Yang Erxi would definitely lose his temper when he heard his daughter talk like this, and then carry the bucket of paint to the public school to finish the rest of the work. But today he just smiled. "Tell the teacher that I will finish painting when I come back." Yang Erxi looked at his father and said, "Father, I am leaving." The old man nodded and said, "Be careful on the road." Yang Erxi kissed his wife on the cheek. It was a very loud kiss. The two children had probably seen this kind of scene many times. They were not surprised but curious about something else. The son opened his eyes wide and asked, "Father, where are you going?" Yang Erxi said, "To the east." The daughter asked, "Father, what are you going to do?" Yang Erxi said, "To war." The daughter said excitedly, "Father, you must win the war." "Of course I will win." Yang Erxi laughed, carried the bow and arrows and carried the pitchfork and went out the door. I really like this chapter. When I was writing, I always felt a very clear child's voice asking me what I am going to do, and a deep male voice saying, "I am going to war." This feeling is really good. I was a little happy writing, so I chatted a little. If you like this work, please come to Chidian.com to vote for me. Your support is my greatest motivation. Chapter 733. Under the leadership of Prince Long Qing, the cavalry of the left King's palace and the allied forces of Yen, Song, and Qi broke through the Tang territory. In the beginning there was no resistance. The northeast border military of the Tang Empire was destroyed. Although many of the Tang soldiers were still alive, they were struggling to survive under the pursuit of the Yen army. Even if they escaped back to the Tang territory, they would not be able to fight. The allied forces that invaded the Tang territory, especially the grassland cavalry from the wilderness, did whatever they wanted in the eastern territory of the Tang Empire. They burned, killed, looted, and committed all kinds of crimes. The grassland cavalry's arms were full of gold and silver. They looked excited and urged their horses to gallop back and forth on the official road. Long Qing looked at the scene at the foot of the hill and frowned slightly. He said coldly, "Consolidate the military discipline. Don't waste time in these remote places. We have to reach Chang'an as soon as possible." The subordinate took the order and left. But some generals had a different view. The undefeated reputation of the Tang Empire for 1,000 years had left an indelible fear in the hearts of these generals. Although the war was going well, they had never expected to break through Chang'an city, including the grassland cavalry. They thought that they should retreat after plundering in the Tang territory to prevent the Tang's counterattack and revenge. The Tang Empire today is not the Tang Empire of the past. The siblings in Chang'an keep making mistakes. Of course, even if they did not make any mistakes, they would not persist. Because heaven wants to destroy the Tang Empire. Long Qing said, "Now the Tang Empire is surrounded by enemies. We have no Tang army in front of us. Chang'an is defenseless. This is the opportunity given by Haotian. If we don't seize it, we will be punished by heaven." A general said, "Even if we attack Chang'an, it will be meaningless. Everyone knows that Chang'an cannot be broken through. What should we do then? There is no city that cannot be broken through in this world." Long Qing did not explain further. In today's world, only a few people, including him, knew the real plan of the West Hill Divine Palace. The Golden Palace's invasion of the south and the world's war against the Tang Empire were just a cover-up or a means to exhaust the Tang army. The West Hill Divine Palace wanted Chang'an to be defenseless. Everything was for the Arai Pestle. The West Hill Divine Palace was confident that they could get the Arai Pestle. The soldiers and civilians of the Tang Empire all thought that Chang'an City could not be breached, so they sent their troops to different places. The West Hill Divine Palace obtained the Arai Pestle and broke the god-stunning Arai. Chang'an City was about to face a massacre. Long Qing gently lifted the reins and walked down the hill. The ears of wheat hung heavily in the farmland. The golden ocean danced in the autumn wind. The scenery was very beautiful. The farmhouses by the fields had already been set ablaze, the black smoke rising and the screams of the Tang could faintly be heard. Long Qing recalled the day he left Chang'an after failing to enter the second floor of the academy many years ago. That day he saw the beautiful rural scenery of the Tang Empire, the farmhouses painted in various colors, and the peaceful and happy lives of the Tang people. At that time he vowed that one day he would return to the Tang Empire and burn everything. It was not out of pity for the Tangs that he ordered the generals to enforce discipline, but because it was necessary for the army to march. In fact, he thought that the scene of being burned and slaughtered was a truly beautiful sight. Long Qing's face, which was not covered by the silver mask, revealed a happy smile. Tens of thousands of coalition troops wreaked havoc in the eastern wilderness of the Tang Empire. No matter how strict the military discipline was, it was impossible to completely follow all orders, not to mention that most of them were undisciplined grassland cavalries. Prince Long Qing's military order was passed down. Most of the grassland cavalries obeyed and followed the military flag to Chang'an City in the west. However, there were still more than 1,000 cavalries left behind. These grassland cavalries believed that with their riding skills, it would not take too long to catch up with the main force in front of them. Therefore they were not in a hurry to set off. Instead they were in a hurry to loot everywhere. They had long known that the Central Plains was rich and the lives of the Tang Empire's people were even better. However, it was not until they entered the Tang Empire's territory that they realized how ridiculous their imagination of the Central Plains was when they stood in the wilderness. The wealth accumulated in an ordinary Tang village was actually more than that of a medium-sized tribe on the grassland. Those exquisite silk, gold and silver treasures made them reluctant to leave. Those fair and beautiful women of the Tang Empire made them salivate. Therefore many of them decided to loot again before the war. Dozens of grassland cavalries from the left king's palace waved the machetes in their hands and rushed into a small village in the call with sharp whistles and laughter. This small village was far away from the official road and luckily avoided the main force of the coalition troops. The nearby refugees also took the small road to hide here. Now there were more than 100 people in the village. Most of these refugees were old, weak women and children. As for the men and their families, they had all died in the battle with the grassland cavalries when their village was destroyed. The grassland cavalries gathered all the people and began to search the houses for valuables. However, this village was a bit remote and relatively poor, so they did not gain much. The grassland cavalries were very dissatisfied and angrily scolded something. The old, weak women and children who were gathered in the middle of the village did not understand what these barbarians were scolding. They all lowered their heads in silence. Only an old woman held a little girl in her arms and stared at the grassland cavalries. The little girl was still young and did not know exactly what had happened. But she knew that her home was burned down by the bad guys in the tattered leather clothes. Her father was killed by these bad guys with a bad smell. So her eyes were full of hatred. A grassland cavalries was angry about the little harvest today. Suddenly he saw the girl's hateful eyes and suddenly became angry. He held the machete and walked toward the crowd. He raised the machete in his hand. Several old people in the crowd stood up and scolded angrily, trying to stop him. But the machete had fallen. The little girl was not hacked to death, because the machete fell on the ground and made a crisp sound. With an arrow lodged in his eye socket, the cavalryman fell stiffly to the ground. The arrow was a bit messy, not like the standard weapon of the Tang army. The grassland cavalries were shocked. They shouted in the barbarian language and quickly got back on their horses. They took down the short wooden bows on their shoulders and looked at the forest behind the village with vigilance. Whoosh! The arrow whistled. An arrow flew out of the forest and hit the shoulder of a grassland cavalry's. Blood spurted out. The grassland cavalries were not surprised. Instead they were happy. They shouted and urged their horses to surround the forest. Through the characteristics of the arrow, they were sure that the archers in the forest were not regular soldiers of the Tang army. They were more likely to be hunters. A few days ago, many brothers of the tribes were killed by the Tang hunters. The hunters were at most in groups of 2 or 3 people. Once they showed up, how could they be a match for these elite cavalries? Young Erxi hid behind a tree, holding the boxwood bough in his hand tightly. His shoulder was against the trunk and his right foot was gently stepping on the ground. He looked a little nervous. Compared with the time when he left home, he was much thinner and darker. His face was messy and full of beard. There were several bloody cuts on his dry lips. He looked very embarrassed. The sound of hooves gradually came. The grassland cavalries came to surround the forest. He jumped out of the tree, pulled his bow and shot. The arrow left the string and hit the waist of a cavalryman. After confirming that there was only one archer hiding in the forest, 3 grassland cavalries held their short wooden bows and shot continuously. Young Erxi was forced to hide behind the tree and did not dare to poke his head out. The rest of the cavalry surrounded him from the side. From time to time, there was a sound of knocking on the trunk. The bark was splashed and the arrows brushed past his body. The grassland cavalries were very experienced in dealing with the Tang hunters. Young Erxi could not fight back at all. He could only watch the enemy rush out of the forest. Although he was in a desperate situation, he did not show any fear on his face except for a little shortness of breath. At this moment, there was a dense sound of breaking the air. A violent rain of arrows fell from the forest. More than 20 grassland cavalries in the front were suddenly shot like hedgehogs. They fell from their horses and died on the spot with blood all over their bodies. Then there was a loud sound of stepping on grass and rubbing trees. Countless people rushed out from the depths of the forest and killed the grassland cavalries like wolves and tigers. The grassland cavalries who were still alive shouted in shock and anger. Their faces showed fear and they pulled the border rope desperately, trying to turn their horses around and escape. If one could understand the language of the barbarians, he would know that the word shouted by the grassland cavalries was ambush. They thought they were ambushed by the Tang army. More than 100 people rushed out of the forest. Some wore ordinary cotton-padded clothes and some wore silk shirts. Most of them were dressed like farmers. None of them wore the uniform of the Tang army. These people were a little older and held a variety of weapons in their hands. For example, Yang Erxi held a pitchfork, some held a hammer, and most of them held a straight knife. The sharp straight knife was the weapon of the Tang army. Were these people the Tang army or not? They were not the Tang army. They used to be the Tang army. They had retired from the army. Now they were businessmen, bodyguards, and farmers. But when the Tang Empire needed them, they were the Tang army. Young Erxi smashed a grassland cavalryman from his horse to the ground. Then he strode forward and turned over his hands. The heavy pitchfork drew an arc in the air and fiercely stabbed into the cavalryman's chest. Then he walked forward and stepped on the grassland cavalryman's body with his right foot. Then he pulled out his hands. With a poof, several bloody holes appeared on the cavalryman's chest. This whole set of movements was very smooth and skillful. He must have repeated it many times. Holding the pitchfork, he ran diagonally to a grassland cavalryman who was surrounded by his companions. He was a little annoyed and muttered in his heart that he had to get a knife today. "Get out of the way. Let me do it," he shouted. The grassland cavalryman was already bloody and unconscious. He leaned against a tree and waved the scimitar in his hand purely out of instinct. He had no ability to resist. The Tang soldiers surrounding the cavalryman heard Young Erxi's anxious shout and understood what he meant. They tacitly made way for him and left the enemy to him. Young Erxi ran to the grassland cavalryman who was dying. He spat into his palm and smashed the pitchfork on him as if he was doing farm work at home. To be continued. If you like this work, please come to Chidian. Come to vote for me. Your support is my biggest motivation. Chapter 734. The ambush on the grassland cavalries was a complete victory. When cleaning the battlefield, Young Erxi, who killed 3 enemies and wounded 2, gained the right to choose the spoils from the dead enemies. The wealth plundered by these cavalries was naturally handed over to the imperial court. The so-called spoils were nothing more than armor and weapons. But the leather armor used by the grassland cavalries was like a tattered fig leaf in the eyes of the former regular Tang army. No one was interested in it, so they could only target those sabers and arrows. Young Erxi wanted to change his saber. The pitchfork was sharpened and could be used to kill people. After many battles, he was very comfortable with it. But after all, it was a farming tool used for weeding, so it was always a little inconvenient. Before the Tang soldiers left the barracks, they could get the honor of bringing their weapons home by the number of years they had served in the army and their daily achievements. No one would be willing to leave the weapons that had accompanied them for many years. Most people would choose to exchange, and finally it became a tradition of the Tang army. Yang Erxi was famous for his archery in the army, so he chose to take the boxwood bow back to his hometown and leave the saber in the army. Now he found that his companions all took the saber home from the barracks, and he felt a little uncomfortable. So he wanted to change his saber. The 2 grassland cavalrymen who were shot dead at the beginning had lost their sabers. That was why he asked his companion to leave the last one to him. Yang Erxi thanked his considerate companions, picked up the scimitar from the bodies of the grassland cavalries, and twirled it. Although he was still not used to it, he felt it was much better than the pitchfork. With a sharp and good saber, the pitchfork looked a little clumsy and ugly. But after thinking for a long time, he still couldn't bear to throw it away, so he carried the pitchfork on his shoulder and walked into the forest. After a while, he walked out of the woods with a black object swaying on the pitchfork. Upon closer inspection, he realized that it was the cured pork leg that he had brought with him when he left. All that was left was the trotter. His companions watched it for a few days and finally couldn't stand it anymore. They all laughed. "Erxi, you should stew the poor pig trotters and eat them or throw them away. Why do you hang them on the pitchfork all day long?" Yang Erxi wouldn't listen to them and said, "My wife gave it to you. Eat it slowly. When I pickled it, I used a lot of salt. When I smoked it, I used pine and cypress branches so it wouldn't go bad." His companions laughed, and absolutely no one had any interest in the poor pig trotters. Yang Erxi felt there was some movement beside him. He turned around and saw a little hand gently pulling the corner of his clothes. It was the little girl who had almost been killed by the grassland cavalries. Looking at the dirty little face, he thought of his daughter and comforted her. "Don't be afraid. We will drive those bad people away tomorrow." The little girl wasn't here to talk to him, and there was no fear in her eyes. Instead, there was a luster in them, and a stream of saliva flowed down from the corner of her mouth. Yang Erxi followed her gaze and found that she had been staring at the pork trotters hanging on the pitchfork. The little girl. The little girl's eyes kept moving with her looking face and said. After thinking for a moment, he removed the pig trotter and stuffed it into the little girl's arms. The little girl laughed happily, wiped the saliva from her mouth, and bowed to him to express her gratitude. Then she ran to her grandmother, shouting something as she ran. One of his companions came to Yang Erxi and said, "Her whole family was killed. Only her grandmother and her granddaughter survived by hiding in the cellar." Yang Erxi looked at the little girl's back and said nothing. They left half of their rations for the refugees in the village, and then drew a simple map, telling them that there was a temporary government office of the imperial court in charge of gathering the refugees and retreating 17 miles away in the southwest. After doing these things, they pulled the 20 or so uninjured horses and left the village. The next morning, these retired Tang soldiers met with the main force. "Yang Erxi, you're good. You got a knife so quickly." A cavalryman looked at him and said. Yang Erxi said proudly, "It's nothing. It took me a lot of effort to kill the 3 barbarians. Speaking of which, if it weren't for me not wanting to fight for credit, the 2 who were seriously injured by me would have been on my account." The cavalryman laughed and said, "Good, good. I won't forget to report to the commander and record your credit. Don't forget that I was in the border army in the 2nd year of the Tianqi era. What's with your attitude?" Yang Erxi laughed and scolded him. He carried the pitchfork and followed his companions into the forest. The cavalryman held his horse's belly and came to a hillside along another road. He came to the side of the commander's horse and reported in a low voice the military information he had just received. Lu Si, the commander of the valiant cavalry battalion, nodded solemnly and raised his hand to signal the cavalryman to leave. Then he looked at the middle-aged man beside him and said, "Long Qing sped up and missed us." The middle-aged man was dressed in cyan and looked calm. He was particularly eye-catching among the hundreds of cavalrymen of the valiant cavalry battalion. It was Cao Xiaoshu. Cao Xiaoshu said, "Long Qing was too anxious and the defense of the prefecture and county was too weak." Lu Si said, "The prefecture and county army could fight on foot, but they couldn't do anything against the grassland cavalry. They fought hard and tried their best." Cao Xiaoshu said, "I don't mean to blame them. Among the prefecture and county army, only the Gushin commandery has real combat power. Hua Shanyue did a good job as the commander of the 3 prefectures, but most of his soldiers were transferred to the northern military camp to resist the Golden Tribe Royal Court from the south. So we can't count on him." Lu Si was a little depressed. He followed Cao Xiaoshu and 800 cavalrymen of the valiant cavalry battalion out of Chang and to the eastern border. It was difficult and dangerous along the way. They also fought with the grassland cavalry several times, but they couldn't fundamentally change the situation. Because they were too few in number, They didn't even dare to meet Long Qing's main cavalry. Qiao Shaoshu said, "Don't think too much. Although they can only harass and chase, at least they can keep the barbarians from being too presumptuous. The people of the eastern border will also suffer a little less." After saying this, he looked at the volunteer soldiers who were gradually disappearing into the forest and said with admiration, "If it weren't for them, the situation would be really unmanageable." There were many people like Yang Erxi. Many farmers left their fields and their homes. They took their travel expenses, luggage, and the sabers or bows and arrows that they brought back from the army to the distant eastern border. At that time, the imperial court's conscription order had not yet arrived in their hometowns, but they left in advance. Logically speaking, this was not a wise thing to do because they had no organization and didn't even know where the battlefield was. But this war was different. It was a war that concerned the survival of the Tang Empire. So the news of the invasion of foreign enemies was a military order, a conscription order. If they met a person on the road or in the forest and saw the old saber or bow on his waist, they could confirm that he was a companion, so they could be organized into a powerful force. As for where the battlefield was, wherever the enemy was, that was where the battlefield was. This was Yang Erxi's idea, and it was also the idea of his companions. According to the post-war statistics, there were more than 20,000 retired Tang soldiers in the central prefectures of the Tang Empire. Before the conscription order arrived, they volunteered to fight against the invaders at the eastern border. This group of earliest and most lovely counterattackers of the Tang Empire, in the end, less than half of them could return home. My body is exhausted, but my mind is still clear. I am very satisfied with these chapters. I hope you all like them. There will be more tonight. Since I said I would fight with my life, I will naturally fight with my life. Please continue to vote for me. To be continued. If you like this work, please come to Qidian. Come to vote for me. Your support is my biggest motivation. Chapter 735. The only one who could save the Tang Empire was the Tangs themselves. For example, Yang Erxi, General Su Qi, who commanded the northern battlefront army to fight against the Golden Palace for 3 sleepless nights, and the people from Hebei Commandery who braved the cold to transport supplies to the front line. However, courage and a strong will were not enough to overcome the raging tide. Because this war against the Tang Empire, although within the scope of the human world, was about to surpass the level of the human world. In the past years, cultivators who rarely paid attention to worldly affairs all responded to the Divine Hall's letter and joined the war. Even the secluded Shenkong Temple sent their own monk soldiers. On the plateau under the Pamir Mountains in the west of the Tang Empire, Master Qi Mei was walking toward the Tang army's camp. The president of the Hall of Respect of the Shenkong Temple had reached the highest state of Buddhahood. Ordinary weapons in the human world could not hurt him at all. Even the martial arts powerhouses in the Tang army could not stop him. In the face of such an otherworldly sublime person, in addition to courage and will, real power was needed. In the past, there were powerhouses at the peak of martial arts like Su Shi and Xia Ho in the Tang army. But now there was only Su Qi. General Xu Cheng in the commander's camp was resourceful and wise, but not famous for his martial arts. Then who could stop Qi Mei? A scholar in an old cotton-padded jacket appeared out of nowhere. He was covered with dust, but he looked very clean both physically and mentally. He still had a wooden ladle tied to his waist, but the old book was nowhere to be seen. At this time the field was in chaos. When the scholar appeared, it was like a warm spring breeze blowing through everyone's heart. The chaotic camp suddenly became very calm. Few soldiers of the Tang army knew who the scholar was. But for some reason when they saw him they felt very peaceful and full of trust. As expected, Qi Mei stopped. Who could stop him? Of course it was the academy. The real power of the Tang Empire was the academy. Although the scholar looked gentle and seemed to be weak, as long as he stood in front of the Tang army's camp, Qi Mei did not dare to take a step forward. This was real power. Before the Buddha's nirvana, he left countless celestial devices and wisdom, in order to prevent the underworld from invading the human world and suppress the daughter of Yama. The world may not understand, but Shenkong Temple must understand. What? Eldest brother looked at Master Qi Mei and asked. His expression was very sincere. He was simply and seriously asking for advice. Master Qi Mei was silent for a long time. Then he softly chanted the name of Buddha and said, "The Buddha underwent nirvana, the headmaster ascended to heaven, and the immovable wisdom king's light fell on the human world. It is hard to go against the will of heaven. This is the proof." Eldest brother was surprised and regretful. He sighed and said, "I see. I didn't expect Master's departure to have such an impact on the Buddhism sect." I guess he didn't expect it either. Master Chi Mei said, "This is also a proof?" Eldest brother looked at the struggling ant stuck in the sticky blood in front of the straw shoe. After thinking for a while, he raised his head and said calmly, "The Academy would like to have a try." Master Chi Mei said concisely, "I admire you. Please." Eldest brother said, "You are no match for me." If this sentence came from second brother's mouth, no matter how emotionless he was, it would be regarded as an expression of pride. If it came from Ning Kei's mouth, he would definitely deliberately be calm, but he must let the other hear his ridicule and contempt, so that he would be furious. But when he said these words slowly, he was really calm. It was just a simple statement of facts so that people who heard it could not feel any displeasure at all. "My state is naturally not as good as Mr. First." Master Chi Mei looked at eldest brother and said softly, "But no matter how high Mr. First's state is, it will be very difficult for him to stop me." This high monk of Shenkong Temple also answered very calmly and confidently. The limitless state was an extremely terrifying killing skill for any cultivator with an ordinary body in the world. But for him, who had cultivated to the state of Buddhahood, it was not impossible to deal with. Eldest brother said thoughtfully, "I don't know how to fight. This is indeed a problem." Master Chi Mei said, "Mr. First has surpassed the 5 states and is extraordinary. He can go to the south, the east, or the north to solve the crisis of the Tang Empire. But you came to the west and met us Buddhist disciples. From this point of view, this is probably the result of unpredictable and inviolable God's will." Eldest brother said seriously, "Although I don't know how to fight and you have cultivated to the state of Buddhahood, as long as we fight more times, I think there will be some effect." Master Chi Mei was silent for a moment. He looked at the Tang army's camp behind eldest brother and said, "Mr. First's words make sense. But before you kill me, I can kill everyone in the camp." After saying this, he took a step forward with a firm expression. At this time he was only 17 steps away from the Tang army's camp. Eldest brother stood before the last step and looked at Chi Mei's firm face. His expression gradually became lonely and he asked, "The Buddhism sect says that mercy is the heart. Master, do you really want to force me to kill people?" Master Chi Mei did not answer him and took another step forward. Eldest brother's cotton-padded jacket trembled slightly. The position of the wooden dipper tied to his belt changed slightly. In the far west of the battlefield, in the Yueluan Kingdom's camp under the Pamir Mountains, a general fell to the ground and died. Cries of surprise could be heard as the crowd gathered around. There were no scars on the general's body. He looked calm as if he was sleeping. Master Chi Mei knew that the other side had already made a move. His left eyebrow slightly raised. He took another step forward. Eldest brother looked at him quietly, the wind ruffling his hair. In the Yueluan Kingdom's camp, an ordinary soldier fell to the ground and died. He killed one person with each step. Chi Mei took a step forward. One person died in the Yueluan Kingdom's camp. Those people died very quickly, so they did not feel pain. There were no scars on their bodies and they did not bleed. No one saw that the back of these dead people's heads were flattened, as if they had been hit by a blunt object. Eldest brother stood where he was and did not move. Only his slightly trembling cotton-padded jacket and the cracks that gradually appeared on the wooden dipper showed what he had done. Eldest brother did not deliberately choose the dead. There were generals and ordinary soldiers. In his view, everyone was equal. So, in the face of death, why should he choose? But obviously not everyone saw it as he did. Chi Mei was still walking forward. At this time he was 9 steps away from the Tang army's camp. This also meant that the Yueluan Kingdom had to pay the price of another 9 people's lives. The expression on eldest brother's face gradually became solemn. The last 8 steps. The Yueluan Kingdom's commander died. The last 7 steps. The successor of the Shenkong Temple's commandment hall died. Master Chi Mei's footsteps became heavier and heavier. It took more and more time to take each step. Before he could take the 6th step, eldest senior brother suddenly said something. "The emperor of the Yueluan Kingdom is dead." This was the first time that eldest brother had killed someone in the limitless state before Chi Mei took a step. What did this mean? It meant that although there were only 6 steps left, there would be more than 6 people dead. It could be 60, 600, 6,000, or even more. No matter how benevolent he was, as long as he killed more people, he would eventually not be afraid to kill. Master Chi Mei's feet could no longer move. At this moment, a pair of feet landed on the ground. The feet were wearing very ordinary green cloth shoes. But when they appeared, the soles of the shoes stepped on the ant that had been struggling in the thick blood for a long time. The owner of the green cloth shoes was a Taoist wearing a green Taoist robe. It was quiet. Eldest brother bowed to the Taoist in indigo and said, "The Abbey Dean is late." The Taoist in indigo was the Abbey Dean of Jisho Abbey, Qinmao. After the headmaster left the human world, he and the chief preaching monk of Shenkong Temple were the supreme existences in the world. If he had appeared earlier, eldest brother would not have been able to kill so many people. Eldest brother did not want to kill, so he said he was late. The Taoist in indigo looked at him and said indifferently, "I wanted to see how many people the headmaster's student of benevolence and forgiveness could kill, so I came out late." Eldest brother understood what he meant. Taoism did not care about the life and death of the emperor of Yueluan Kingdom. It did not care how many people from the Buddhism sect would die today. Even if the Buddhism sect and the Yueluan Kingdom were destroyed, the Taoist in indigo would not care. Eldest brother sighed and said, "It turns out that they all want me to kill people." Then he looked at Master Chi Mei and said with a little pity, "Now do you still think that God's will cannot be disobeyed?" Master Chi Mei was silent. Eldest brother looked at the wooden dipper tied to his waist and looked at the cracks on it. Junimo is right. Fighting is to use hard things to hit the weak parts of the enemy. You must use all your strength and not be merciful. Abidin, you did this. He raised his head and looked at the Taoist in indigo. He smiled and said, "Then I finally learned to fight." The Taoist in indigo raised his eyebrows slightly and his sleeves fluttered. There was a thunderous sound in the field. The wooden dipper on eldest brother's waist was nowhere to be seen. Behind Master Chi Mei, countless pieces of wood were scattered. The wooden dipper was broken. Master Chi Mei's head was seriously deformed as if it had been crushed by a mountain. Even if his body became a Buddha, it was now just a crumbling clay Buddha statue. Master Chi Mei fell to the ground. He was seriously injured and could not get up again. Blood slowly seeped out of eldest brother's cotton-padded jacket and dyed his shoulder red. At that moment he used the first blow after learning to fight on Master Chi Mei. And it was also at that moment that he was almost seriously injured by the Taoist in indigo. The Taoist in indigo looked at him quietly and said, "Your state is not as good as mine. But I didn't expect that on the road of distanceless state, you are walking more steadily than me." Eldest brother said, "Abidin, you have been walking too fast these years. Naturally it is not stable." The Taoist in indigo suddenly asked, "Rumor has it that you entered the cave profundity in the morning and knowing destiny in the evening. When did you cross the 5 states?" Eldest brother replied, "This time it took a long time. It took me 3 days." The Taoist in indigo was silent for a long time. He put his hands behind his back and shook his head with a smile. His smile was free and easy. Although his hands were behind his back, they were embracing the world. Eldest senior brother remained silent and left. Then the Taoist in indigo left. The first battle of distanceless state in the world began like this. Don't panic, there is still to be continued. If you like this work, please come to Chidian. Come to vote for me. Your support is my greatest motivation. Chapter 736. A child was smashing stones outside Tile Town. That year, the stone Buddha collapsed and the Lank Temple was destroyed. The Yulan Hungry Ghost Festival was never held again. Naturally, no tourists came to Tile Town, and the stone fish pond by the street had long dried up. The people now mainly relied on the restoration of the Lank Temple to make a living. The monks in the temple were generous, so they had a good life. The stones in the mountains and valleys had become the most convenient toys for the children. At the same time, they were also a good source of income. The stone Buddha was made of good material and could be carved into various small Buddha statues to sell. The child followed his mother's instructions and wanted to smash the 2 stones along the grain. But today was the first time he started this work, so he was very unfamiliar with it. He failed for a long time. He was so angry that he kept wiping his snot and smashing his fists until his fingernails were bleeding. A scholar in a cotton-padded jacket appeared beside him with a blood stain on his left shoulder. The scholar saw the child smashing the stones and asked for his help. No one knew where he got such great strength from, but the 2 stones collided in the air and were neatly divided into 4 pieces. The child was very happy and thanked the scholar. He wanted to worship him as his teacher. The scholar smiled faintly before disappearing. A moment later, a Taoist in indigo appeared outside the town. He asked the child a few questions, then smiled and disappeared. The child looked at the 4 stones in his arms and was a little confused. He turned and walked into the town. The bell echoed in Chaiyang City. The bell did not come from the White Tower Temple but from the palace. It was the funeral bell for the death of the king. An old woman was sitting on a stool by the narrow street. Hearing the bell, she rubbed her cloudy eyes and murmured, "What's going on? What's going on?" A scholar appeared in front of the old woman and asked politely, "Can the torn cotton-padded jacket be mended?" The old woman looked at the holes and bloodstains on the left shoulder of the cotton-padded jacket and said angrily, "Where did you go to fight? You're so young yet you don't learn good things." After the cotton-padded jacket was mended, the scholar left. A moment later, the Taoist in indigo appeared in front of the old woman. The old woman looked at the tear on the lower hem of his clothes and waved her hand. "The material is too good. I dare not mend it." The Taoist in indigo left again. The army of the West Hill Divine Palace had already headed north. Today the Peach Mountain was quiet and lonely. Only 2 or 3 divine priests walked by slowly. The scholar appeared in front of the shrine and left. The green-robed Taoist then appeared and left again. In this late autumn, the scholar and the Taoist in indigo traveled through the mountains and rivers of the mortal world. One person was in front and the other was behind. 10,000 miles in an instant was limitless. Every time it appeared, the injury on the scholar's shoulder would worsen. The Taoist in indigo was fine. On a nameless island deep in the South Sea. On the white beach there was a short wooden stick. Half of the stick was buried in the sand. It looked like an ordinary wooden stick, but it was not ordinary at all. Because its master had left the human world, it was left here, appearing very ordinary. The scholar appeared on the beach and bent down to pick up the wooden stick. The Taoist in indigo then appeared on the beach and stretched out his palm toward the blue sea. A sword flew over from the sea and landed in his hand. The Taoist in indigo asked, "Are you tired after walking for so long?" The eldest brother said, "Compared with the Abbey Dean, I am still young." Then he asked, "Aren't you tired?" The Taoist in indigo said, "I walk faster." The eldest brother said, "The Abbey Dean walks really fast. If I can't find this stick, I really don't know what to do." The Taoist in indigo said, "Even if you find the stick left by the headmaster, you can only hold on for another 7 days." The eldest brother looked at him and said, "It's good to hold on for one more day." The Taoist in indigo said, "Destiny has been decided. Why bother yourself?" The eldest brother said, "There is no destiny in the human world. No one knows what will happen in 7 days. 7 days were enough for the Tang Empire's West Army to defeat the invaders of the Yueluan Kingdom, enough for Ning Ke to control the God-stunning array in Chang'an, and enough for the Academy to do many things." The Taoist in indigo said, "In 7 days the Academy will no longer exist." The eldest brother said, "The Master is fighting in heaven. We disciples will not let this happen." The hierarch of the West Hill Divine Palace had already gone to the Academy. According to the calculations of Haotian Taoism, the Academy had no ability to reverse the situation. However, the eldest brother's calm expression seemed strange. The Taoist in indigo paused and said, "You should know where the real attack of Haotian Taoism is." The army of the West Hill Divine Palace was in the south of the Tang Empire, in Qinghe County, outside the Verdant Canyon. The eldest brother said calmly, "I am not as good as Junimo, so I am here." The meaning of this sentence was clear. Junimo was there. The Taoist in indigo said, "Don't be modest. Although Junimo has infinite potential, and even I can't see how far he can go on the battlefield, you are still the strongest eldest brother in the Academy. Your state is the highest, and you are the biggest threat to Haotian Taoism, so I am here to watch you." The eldest brother said, "The Abbey Dean is also the biggest threat to the Tang Empire, so I have been waiting for you to watch me. Moreover, the Abbey Dean's state is far above mine, so the Academy has the advantage." Surpassing the 5 states did not mean being invincible. For example, cultivators in the Tianqi state could have almost invincible power after being infused with Haotian's divine flame, but they might not be able to win against the siege of the world. Only the limitless state, which was mysterious and unpredictable, could take the head of a general from 1,000 miles away. It was the most terrifying and difficult to guard against on the battlefield. The Taoist in indigo said, "I can ignore you." The eldest brother showed a rare expression of confidence and said, "You must." The Taoist in indigo said, "Why do you say so?" The eldest brother looked at him and said seriously, "I have learned how to fight. If the Abbey Dean ignores me and doesn't come to watch me, I can kill many people, such as the Great Divine Priest of Judgment, the Great Divine Priest of Revelation, and Yi Su. Except for Liu Bai and the Hierarch, I have no confidence. I can kill the rest." The Taoist in indigo said, "I can also kill many people." The eldest brother shook his head and said, "You know very well that if you can't kill the people in Chang'an and the Academy, then it will be meaningless for this battle." The Taoist in indigo said, "I have said that you can only hold on for 7 days at most. After 7 days I can kill without restraint." The eldest brother said, "I have also said that there is no fate in the world. No one knows what will happen after 7 days. The scenery in the back of the mountain of the academy became a fake painting. Everything in the painting seemed to be moving, but in fact it was not moving at all. It was like the ever-changing lines on a chessboard. In the black and white world of Go, the two sides gradually merged and condensed. Then a large blank space appeared in the middle. At the edge of the blank space, a brave soldier fell to the side. The proud state knight in the middle of the chessboard was covered with dust. Behind the state knight, the carriage was badly damaged and could not move forward anymore, leaving only a deep rut. The scenery gradually came back to life. The silver stream between the cliffs in the distance collided with the pool and made a roaring sound. The woods all over the mountains and fields straightened their waists again. The dozen West Hill Divine Guards beside the carriage were already dead. Countless dense lines appeared on their bodies. But the figure on the carriage was still tall. It broke through the game and was not hurt at all. In a forest somewhere in the back of the mountain, the little white wolf curled up in a cave and kept licking its injured forelimbs. The silk quilt in the cave was dyed red with blood. It looked very sad and pitiful. On the clear stream behind the iron-making room, the big white goose was still sitting on the top of the water wheel. It bent its neck to the sky but did not sing. It looked extremely angry and unwilling. Blood gradually dyed its white belly feathers red. The old yellow bull on the meadow in the distance looked more tired and old. The chessboard under the pine tree on the cliff plateau had been broken into countless pieces. The fifth brother and the eighth brother looked at the broken chessboard on the table and kept silent for a long time. Blood flowed from the corners of their lips. They had suffered serious internal injuries. The two brothers looked at each other without saying anything. They could see the faint regret in each other's eyes. They should not have spent half of their life on the chessboard just because they liked it. If they had learned some fighting skills from their teacher, they would not have allowed the old Haotian Taoism to be so arrogant. The hierarch lord laughed out loud. The thousands of gauze curtains on the carriage trembled uneasily. A wind suddenly rose from the mountain, rustling the pine trees. The flowing clouds crashed into the distant waterfall and broke into pieces. His laughter was extremely heroic and full of spirit. First kill Su Shi, then destroy the academy, then destroy Chang'an. The Tang Empire would no longer exist. Undoubtedly this would be the peak of his life. But at this moment, a person came from the clouds on the mountainside. It was the third sister of the academy, Yulian. She walked slowly on the mountain road. Yulian was very petite. She looked very delicate, but her temperament was gentle and mature. If you only looked at her, you would think that she was a girl. If you looked at her eyes carefully, you would think that she was a woman who had seen everything in the world. Looking at her on the mountain road, the hierarch lord's laughter gradually stopped. Miss Third, I know that you are extraordinary. The see-through state is just a means to deceive the world. As long as you want, you can enter the knowing destiny state at any time. So don't be deliberately mystifying here. Yulian did not say anything and kept walking. As her footsteps rose and fell, something very strange happened. Her black hair gradually fell below her waist. But it was not her black hair that was growing longer, but she was becoming shorter. Yulian walked on the mountain road. With every step she became shorter. Her originally very delicate appearance became more tender, and finally she gradually became a 12 or 13 years old girl. Her aura was also changing and improving. As the hierarch lord said, she easily broke through the threshold of the see-through state and entered the knowing destiny state. Looking at the changes of Yulian through the gauze curtain, the hierarch lord indifferently said, I said. His voice suddenly stopped. His brows suddenly furrowed. Because after Yulian entered the knowing destiny state, her aura was still improving. Walking on the mountain road, she went from the see-through state to the peak of the knowing destiny state. Let me be crazy. Let me be stupid tomorrow. I don't care about tomorrow. I have more today. To be continued. If you like this work, please come to Chidian.com to vote for me. Your support is my greatest motivation. Chapter 737. The back of the mountain of the academy had always been mysterious in the cultivation world. Third sister Yulian was even more low-key. Not many people knew of her existence. The West Hill Divine Palace knew a little more, but they only knew that she was a powerhouse in the see-through realm. It was also recorded in the Reach Hand Scroll of the Tomes of Arcane. But the Lord Headmaster and the other true bigwigs never believed this. The academy was a magical place. The eldest brother learned the Tao in the morning and entered the Tao in the evening. He jumped 2 levels from the no-doubt state to the knowing destiny state in a day. The second brother reached the no-doubt state in 14 days. Yulian was the academy's third sister. just below eldest brother and second brother. Even though the second floor of the academy was ranked according to the time of entry, eldest brother and second brother were extraordinary figures. They had suppressed the world wayfarers of the Buddhism and Taoism sects in the autumn rain at the Lank Temple, and forced Liu Bai, the sage of sword, to not dare to draw his sword. How could she be weak? There were also many geniuses in the Tao sect. Yi Su had broken through the close of life and death at such a young age. Yi Hongyu disdained to compete with Qin Pipi for the title of being the youngest to enter the knowing destiny state. She suppressed her cultivation state to the see-through state for several years with great determination and clarity of Taoism. It was not until she reached perfection that she casually stepped over the threshold on the snow cliff, which was similar to the situation now. That was why the hierarch lord was not surprised to see Yu Lian walking slowly on the mountain path and instantly breaking through the see-through realm to the knowing destiny state. Until her aura continued to rise, the peak of the knowing destiny state. The Lord Headmaster's expression finally became serious, but his voice was still dignified and confident. Hao Yin bestowed upon me the divine power to shepherd sheep in the human world. Before the boundless light, even your two senior brothers are no match for me. Even if you reveal your true strength today, you can only become a sacrifice. The hierarch lord looked at the beautiful girl outside the veil and said, Hao Yin Taoism respects the headmaster of the academy. For the sake of your teacher, hand over the array pestle and I will spare your lives. Yu Lian took out an object wrapped in cloth from her sleeve and placed it on a wooden stool by the side of the mountain path. She looked at the giant sedan calmly and said, My eyes are blinding. I'll spare your life for the sake of your stupidity. The sect leader was slightly startled, then he laughed out loud. His laughter shook the layers of gauze and echoed in the quiet back mountain of the academy. You're as short as a little girl, but you sure talk big. The headmaster stopped laughing and shouted, Do you really think you have the ability to defeat me? What a joke. His voice was cold and loud, like thunder in the deep winter. Yu Lian had already walked to the front of the giant chariot. Looking at the tall figure behind the gauze curtain, he smiled and said, You are shorter than me. What right do you have to mock me? The figure on the carriage was clearly so tall and imposing, but she said that he was shorter than her. The Lord Hierarch suddenly fell silent. He stared at the Akiji girl outside the curtain and said slowly, Who are you? The sect leader's voice was extremely solemn, and there was even a hint of uneasiness in it. I've always known who you are, but you don't even know who I am. Everyone says that you and I are the two most mysterious people in the cultivation world, but now it seems that this saying is really laughable. In the quiet back mountain of the academy, a cicada suddenly chirped. The 4 seasons here were all spring and there was no true autumn. Following the sound of cicadas, autumn arrived. The autumn wind blew and yellow leaves fell because these cicadas were autumn cicadas. Under the pine tree, the 5th brother and the 8th brother were a little surprised and suddenly understood. They looked at each other and smiled. Then they bowed to Yu Lian and left the cliff yard quietly. The hierarch's voice became more and more uneasy. He said coldly, Who are you? He heard the cicadas and vaguely guessed something. But he could not believe it no matter what. Yu Lian's aura suddenly became indifferent. Her delicate and beautiful facial features seemed to be covered with a thin layer of frost. She looked extremely mysterious and arrogant. She clearly looked up at the tall figure on the chariot. But it seemed that she was looking down at an ant. An extremely cold voice came from her lips. Xiong Chumo, you damn dwarf, what right do you have to stand higher than me? As soon as she finished, countless cicadas chirped in the back mountain of the academy. Cicadas, what did they know? The whole mountain was filled with cicadas' mournful and frightening chirping in autumn. The autumn wind was getting stronger and the yellow leaves fell. Countless yellow leaves fell on the giant chariot. The chariot was covered with layers of gauze. It was not destroyed in the battle with Su Shi, nor was it damaged after breaking the chess game of the academy. However, it looked so fragile in front of the falling yellow leaves and was torn into countless pieces. The broken gauze flew away, and there was nothing left on the chariot. Few people had seen the real hierarch lord of the divine halls of West Hill. That was why he was called one of the 2 most mysterious people in the world. At this moment, his real body finally appeared in the daylight. He appeared in the mountains of cicadas. An old Taoist priest appeared on the chariot with a very ordinary appearance. But the old Taoist priest was very special. He was very short, even shorter than a boy of 8 or 9 years old. He was very thin, even thinner than the victims of the famine. He looked like a doll made of several pieces of dry wood. He looked so pitiful and ridiculous. This was the real appearance of the hierarch lord of the divine halls of West Hill. The hierarch was not used to the sunlight. There was a look of panic on his face. Because his secular name, which no one knew, was shouted out by Julien. Because he found that without layers of gauze covering his body, the tall and stalwart figure was no longer there. He became very flustered, like a naked man who was stripped of his clothes, and did not know where to put his hands. The big white goose on the roof of the water cart behind the smithy squawked shamelessly when it saw this scene. Amid the chirping of the cicadas, Julien's aura was still rising. In an instant she had surpassed the high threshold above the 5 states. Everything was clear. The hierarch lord finally came to his senses. He looked at the girl outside the chariot, and a shrill and angry scream burst out from his dry lips. Lin Wu. 23 years cicada cultivation. You're hiding in the academy? You've become a woman. There were 13 disciples in the back of the mountain of the academy, and the most inconspicuous one was third sister Julien. The other disciples were all peerless geniuses in their own fields, but she seemed to be the only one who did not stand out. She seldom talked to people and rarely stayed in the back of the mountain. She sat by the east window on the second floor of the old library every day, quietly drawing hairpin-style small regular script. It seemed that nothing in the world could arouse her interest, and it was difficult for her to arouse the interest of others. Not to mention the people in the cultivation world, even Ning Ke and the other disciples sometimes forgot that they had such a senior sister, because she was too quiet and easily forgotten. At this critical moment, eldest brother arranged for the disciples of the academy to go to different places to do what they should do, but left her in the academy. It was not that he was not worried that the academy would be attacked, nor was he like Ning Ke and the empress who gave up Helan City. It was because he believed that as long as third sister was in the academy would be safe. Because she used to have a name, Lin Wu. She was the 23-year cicada cultivation. The headmaster of the academy once said this to his disciples. There was a kind of cicada in the arid land of the far west. It hid in the mud for 23 years, and only woke up when the snow melted and the flood came. It bathed in the mud, dried its wings in the cold wind and flew into the void. At that time Chin Pippi was fascinated by it. Eldest brother and second brother smiled and said nothing. Julien was also there, and she cooked a bowl of noodles with vegetables for the headmaster. He was the most talented person in the devil's doctrine in the past 100 years. Master Lotus had wholeheartedly wanted him to inherit his mantle. But his father died in the hands of Lotus, so he calmly refused the opportunity. He chose a path that no one had ever walked before. He wanted to practice a unique skill that no one in the devil's doctrine had ever succeeded in. He was the youngest and the last suzerain in the history of the devil's doctrine. He had a few students who were older than him. He continued to cultivate. Finally he succeeded, and then he disappeared. From that day on, he became the most mysterious person in the cultivation world. That year the headmaster met a little girl. The little girl was like a jade carving, extremely cute, but her eyes were extremely calm. Only the headmaster could see the confusion and fear in the deepest part of her eyes. What's there to be afraid of? The headmaster said to the little girl, everything is just the appearance. Is this body so important to you? The little girl understood and bowed with hands folded in front of her chest, looking elegant. The headmaster shook his head. The little girl clumsily put her hands on the side of her waist and bowed. She was very shy. The headmaster nodded with satisfaction. When the devil's doctrine was destroyed, the West Hill Divine Palace hunted down the remnants of the devil's doctrine. The little girl was just a little girl. She had no ability to protect herself. She did not know how to live the next 23 years. But she did not beg the headmaster. Because she had her own pride. The headmaster did not wait for her to speak and said, "Come back to the academy with me." The headmaster said it casually, as if she had always been in the academy. From that day on, the headmaster had a female disciple. As more and more disciples entered the academy, she began to be called the third sister. A few years later there was a female professor in the academy, Julien. The female professor sat by the east window and wrote the hairpin-style small regular script for many years. Cicadas were chirping outside the window. She was very inconspicuous. She did not care about the world, and the world did not care about her. She was the legendary 23-year cicada Lin Wu. What a big fog. The hierarch lord's shocked and angry roar was still echoing in the back mountain of the academy. The roar was like winter thunder, but it could not suppress the chirping of the cicadas. He looked at the young and beautiful girl and said incredulously, "How did you become a woman?" Julien said sarcastically, "How Yin can become a woman, why can't I?" If I can't even see through the appearance, how can I cultivate the 23-year cicada cultivation? If Yisu was standing in front of me, he would not ask such a stupid question. If he could see through life and death, he could naturally see through these details. The hierarch still could not suppress his shock and said, "Although you are a demon, you are still a suzerain. You are shameless to change your sect and become an outsider's disciple." Yu Lian looked at the sky and said, "The headmaster of the academy is worthy to be the teacher of all ages, let alone me. Also, but it's such a good plot. It's a waste not to call for monthly votes. Vote for monthly votes. In the name of the third sister. To be continued. If you like this work, please come to Chidian. Come to vote for me. Your support is my greatest motivation." Chapter 738. The hierarch stared at Yu Lian and said coldly, "You're the hierarch, but you still want your younger brother to fight with those beasts. Is this what the headmaster taught you?" Yu Lian said indifferently, "Even though you're not as powerful as me, it would take me some effort to kill you. As long as I can exhaust you, it's good enough." The hierarch was so angry that he laughed. He said, "Your two younger brothers almost died. You just wanted to exhaust them and you just stood by and watched. You are really sinister and cold-blooded. If the headmaster knew that you would do this, he would probably regret taking you as his disciple." Yu Lian said, "I'm the hierarch of the Enlightenment doctrine. It's natural for me to be sinister and cruel. Since the headmaster accepted me as his disciple, how could he not know what kind of person I am?" The headmaster shouted sternly, "Then today I will deal with you on behalf of Haotian, you evildoer of the devil's doctrine." Yu Lian looked calm. Even though her opponent was the most powerful cultivator from the divine halls of West Hill, her calmness was an undisguised humiliation to her opponent. "Xiong Chimo, you were not my match decades ago. Now you're even less likely to be my match." She looked at the hierarch's withered arm and his broken wrist. She said indifferently, "Like I said, if you blind yourself, I'll let you leave the academy." The hierarch's left hand was cut off by General Su Shi at the foot of the Shao Mountain. From the Shao Mountain to the back of the mountain of the academy, he had gone through 2 tough battles. Then he faced the most unfathomable person in the devil's doctrine, the 23-year cicada cultivation with the headmaster for many years. But he was still confident. The hierarch suddenly became serious. He raised his right fist, lowered his waist and took a deep breath. Then he punched. He was very thin and short, so his fists were also very small and looked a little ridiculous. But it was not ridiculous at all, since it could kill Su Shi and suppress the divine halls of West Hill for many years. It was a terrifying fist. It was an ordinary fist, but it seemed to gather all the chi of heaven and earth in the back of the mountain of the academy. Between his fingers, there was a pure white light, as if he was holding a sun in his fist. Yu Lian looked at the fist and suddenly lowered her head. The cicadas in the back of the mountain were more agitated and sad. The two most mysterious cultivators in the cultivation world had finally met and fought. The wind from the fist was furious. The fist was as heavy as a mountain. The power of the fist was like the sea. The bluestone slabs on the mountain path were flipped open like pieces of paper and flew far away. Trees collapsed one after another. The strong trunks only bent, but most of the big trees were directly snapped, making countless cracking sounds. Yu Lian was not hit. Her body was like a cicada's wings, drifting away in the forest with the wind. It was as if she had really integrated with the breath of heaven and earth. It was impossible to find her. The cries of the autumn cicadas continued, and thousands of yellow leaves rustled down. Thousands of tears appeared on the sect master's divine robe. Then, an extremely thin layer of light appeared on the surface of his body, and the yellow leaves were instantly shattered into threads. The most powerful man in the West Hill Divine Palace finally calmed down. He looked at the broken trees and gravel in the valley and shouted, 23-year cicada cultivation. Do you really think that you are invincible just because you have surpassed the 5 realms? You've entered the sky demon realm at most. Since you can't be immortal, how can you fight against light? He slowly raised his hands, the remaining palm of his right hand facing the sky. His expression was abnormally firm and persistent. His voice was like a burst of spring thunder, spreading to the surroundings and the sky. Haoyan, please give me strength. The sonorous voice was still floating in the air when the sky reacted. The setting sun in the west suddenly became bright. It was no longer red and warm. Instead, it seemed to be supreme, causing people to feel reverence in their hearts. A majestic power passed through the sunset clouds in the sky, ignoring the gathering array that covered the back of the mountain of the academy, and fell on the hierarch's body along with the blazing sun. The hierarch's thin and short body suddenly became extremely tall. His body seemed to have a terrifying power that was close to the way of heaven. In just a breath, the falling yellow leaves were blown up into the sky and dared not to fall again. Even the cries of the cicadas in the mountain seemed to be quieter at this moment. The hierarch finally used the divine skill of Tianqi. Yulian's figure appeared outside the forest. Her innocent face finally showed a trace of solemnity. She was confident in the battle above the 5 realms, but she had no experience. In fact, all the powerhouses who had fought above the 5 realms, except those in the limitless state, had returned to Haotian's divine kingdom, which meant death. She looked at the light beam falling from the west and suddenly smiled. She reached out her right hand as if picking up a pen. She used the non-existent pen to write a few hairpin-style small regular script in the air. Calm your heart, concentrate, ignore the world, don't ask about the way of heaven and just immerse yourself in your own world. That is your own world. The headmaster said this to her years ago. There seemed to be a transparent barrier in the sky of the back of the mountain of the academy, like the wings of cicadas. The light beam falling from the west fell on the barrier, and most of it was refracted and sprinkled on the human world. This was Yu Lian's world, and she refused to let Haotian's divine light enter. Arrogant fool. You think you can block Haotian's divine light by creating another world? Don't forget that this is Haotian's world, and your world will always be below Haotian. The hierarch shouted angrily, and continued to welcome Haotian's divine light. Yu Lian looked at him and said, "Stupid, now the evil heaven is fighting with the headmaster, and it can't even take care of itself. How can it always care about your life? Don't forget that in its eyes, you are worse than a dog." As she spoke, she had already let go of the pen in her right hand, and her 5 fingers were like blooming chrysanthemums. A very faint aura came from her fingertips, and spread throughout the back of the mountain of the academy. All the trees in the back of the mountain of the academy began to tremble, and all the leaves seemed to be alive. Each leaf was a cicada. The hierarch did not believe what she said at all, but suddenly he found that the setting sun in the west had really dimmed, and became ruddy and peaceful again. He could not help but be shocked. He let out an unwilling scream and his body disappeared, ready to leave. Yu Lian would not give him such a chance. The hierarch was in the back of the mountain of the academy, among thousands of cicadas. No matter how fast he moved, he was not as fast as the cicadas. He could not leave Yu Lian's world. Thousands of cicadas flew over, making a deafening buzzing sound, and then covered the surface of his body, including his face, and looked extremely terrifying. One of the autumn cicadas slightly flapped its wings. The hierarch's right eye was blind. More than a dozen autumn cicadas danced. The hierarch's right hand was broken. A shrill scream came from thousands of autumn cicadas. His left hand was cut off by Su Shur at the foot of the Shao mountain. His right hand was cut off at the back of the mountain of the academy. Only his bare wrists were left of his fists. He hugged his arms. The light that was previously held in his fists, and the light that Haotian sprinkled on him, were all poured into the embrace between his arms. There was a bright light in front of him as if a round sun was born. The sun exploded. Thousands of cicadas fluttered and scattered. One of the cicadas fluttered back. Taking advantage of this opportunity, the hierarch, who was covered in blood, rolled away like a stray dog. Yu Lian's figure appeared again, with blood flowing from the corner of her mouth, and a strong smile. The peak battle of Haotian Taoism and the Devil's Doctrine. The hierarch of the West Hill Divine Palace lost an arm, was blind, and the Snow Mountain was destroyed. No matter how powerful Haotian Taoism's divine skill was, it could not cure his serious injuries, and thus he became a useless person. The Devil's Doctrine's Grandmaster, 23-year Cicada, 1. She was the first female disciple of the headmaster of the academy. The academy was still invincible. Not today. Similarly, there is a separate chapter. To be continued. If you like this work, please come to Chidian.com to vote for me. Your support is my greatest motivation. Chapter 739. The little white wolf came out of the hole with a white cloth wrapped around its injured leg. The big white goose wobbled over from the stream. The old yellow bull opened his eyes. 5th brother and 8th brother had returned to the cliff yard. Yu Lian took out a wooden comb from her sleeve and combed her messy hair carefully. Then she tidied up her clothes and put the comb back into her sleeve after confirming that there was no problem. The old yellow bull slightly lowered his head. The big white goose and the little white wolf leaned forward. 5th brother and 8th brother greeted them with hands folded in front. Yu Lian returned the greeting solemnly. The autumn wind stopped and the autumn cicadas were quiet. The academy was still the same. "Be careful, senior sister," Song Qian said. "I'll leave the academy to you, fifth brother." Yulian picked up the thing wrapped in cloth from the mountain road and walked out of the academy. Ning Ke left the princess mansion and went to the street, ready to go to the academy. Although there were many things to deal with in Chang and he was going to the academy to get the Array Pestle, and he was worried about the safety of the academy. "You don't have to go." A young girl appeared in front of him and handed him an item wrapped in cloth. Ning Ke was very surprised, because he recognized the cloth. It was a cheap cloth bought by Sang Sang at the East Gate Market. He used it to wrap the Array Pestle of the god-stunning Array. So this cloth was the Array Pestle. He took the Array Pestle and looked at the girl in front of him. His eyes showed vigilance and then became confused. He was sure that he had never seen her before, but he felt that he had seen her somewhere before. With a pair of black ponytails and a beautiful face, this 12 or 13-year-old girl could be called a girl or a little girl. She was on the dividing line. Ning Ke looked into her eyes and saw her calm expression. He finally guessed who she was and could not help but be shocked speechless. He even almost threw away the Array Pestle. Yu Lian used the simplest words to describe what happened in the academy, especially the battle with the hierarch of the West Hill Divine Palace. She mainly said that the hierarch was very short. It was only then that Ning Ke realized that the tall and majestic figure in the eyes of hundreds of millions of Taoism believers was actually just an illusion. The hierarch lord turned out to be a damn dwarf. Back in the wilderness, when he shot 5 people with the primordial 13 arrows, both the great divine priest of revelation and Yi Hongyu had a hard time withstanding it. However, the hierarch did not even try to dodge. The scene at that time brought great pressure to Ning Quebec. He thought to himself, no wonder he's the most powerful cultivator in Haotian Taoism. He can even deal with the primordial 13 arrows so easily. Only now did he understand that it was because the sect leader was very short and he was aiming at the figure. The iron arrow flew over the man's head, so naturally there was no need to dodge. "Why did you let him live?" Ning Ke gradually calmed down from the shock and asked. "Some people are more useful alive than dead." Yu Lian said, "Many years ago when Xiong Chumo was still young, he went to the wilderness with the seniors of Haotian Taoism. I was still young so we fought when we met. I destroyed the snow mountain in his lower abdomen and made him immortal. Unexpectedly, it was a blessing in disguise. He devoted himself to cultivation and became what he is today. However, people with abnormalities always have some psychological problems. Now that he is disabled, you don't have to worry about him. Instead, the people in the West Hill Divine Palace will have a headache." Just like the hierarch and many other bigwigs in Haotian Taoism, Ning Ke never thought that third sister was just a cultivator in the see-through state. Therefore, he was not surprised to know that the academy was still under her protection. It was not until now that he finally realized that the one who was defeated by third sister was not an ordinary cultivator, but the hierarch lord of the West Hill Divine Palace. Who in the world could defeat the hierarch lord? Ning Ke was shocked after knowing the answer. Third sister was the grandmaster of the Devil's Doctrine, 23-year cicada cultivation. Among the disciples on the second floor of the academy, third sister, Yu Lian was the first one he knew. They even knew each other when they went to the old library before they exchanged letters with Chen Pippi. Over the years he did not talk much with Yu Lian, but she would always give him advice at important moments. And it started when he was still an ordinary student before he entered the back mountain. Therefore Ning Ke had always respected third sister, even more than eldest brother and second brother. Walking on the long and narrow stairs of the city wall, Ning Ke could not help but glance at Yu Lian after a few steps. Looking at her young face and the swaying ponytails behind her, it was hard for him to adapt to what he saw. "Is there a flower on my face?" Yu Lian asked. Ning Ke said with a smile, "I just want to look at you a little longer. You are a famous person." Yu Lian smiled. Ning Ke said, "No wonder the headmaster refused to accept Tang Xiaotang as his disciple. It's because of seniority? So I am 1 generation older than Tang?" Yu Lian said, "If we count from the founding father of the Enlightenment doctrine, you are dozens of generations older than him." Ning Ke praised again, "The third sister of the second floor is the 23-year cicada cultivation." Yu Lian slightly raised her eyebrows and said, "It's just a coincidence. The headmaster doesn't care about these little tricks." Ning Ke said, "Maybe the headmaster likes these things." As they were talking, the senior sister and junior brother had already reached the top of the Chang'an city wall. Ning Ke thought of something and took out an ID token from his belt. The ID token was not made of gold, wood, or stone. It was pure white with a black pattern carved in relief. Judging from the fresh marks on the edge, it seemed to be carved not long ago. The black pattern was a statue. The pure white periphery was like a bright light. Because the statue was facing away from the light, its face and body were immersed in deep shadows, looking very gloomy. Ning Ke asked, "This ID token was given to me by senior sister before I went to the wilderness. What is carved on it?" Yu Lian walked to the edge of the city wall and looked down at Chang'an City. She said, "Yama or Haoyan?" Ning Ke walked to her side and followed her gaze down. He said, "What ID token is this?" Yu Lian said, "The ID token of the Master of the Enlightenment Doctrine." The Desolate did not hesitate to exterminate their entire race to protect me and Sang Sang. I have never understood why. Now it seems that it's because of this ID token. In the front gate of the Enlightenment Doctrine, Lian Sheng's last attack failed. Now I think it's also because of this ID token. If I think about it carefully, this ID token has saved me many times, but I didn't investigate it. How stupid of me. Ning Ke naturally put the waist token back into his belt and did not intend to return it to Yu Lian. Then he solemnly bowed to her to express his gratitude. What he did not understand was why Third Sister would so casually give such an important ID token of the Master of the Enlightenment Doctrine to him when he led the students of the academy to practice in the wilderness. "Do you remember what I said to you when you were preparing for the opening test?" Yu Lian asked. At that time, Ning Ke was just an ordinary student of the academy. He was preparing for the opening of the second floor of the academy. He was under great pressure and had a conversation with Yu Lian in the Sword Forest. "I remember. Senior sister said that she would introduce a powerhouse who was not weaker than Lu Bai to be my teacher." "That's right. Who was she going to introduce?" "Myself, of course." Yu Lian said, "Your ocean of qi and mountain of snow was a mess at that time, and it's still a mess now. Besides, your talent in talisman Taoism has not shown yet, so you are not suitable for cultivation at all. However, your bones are clear and you have amazing perseverance. You are a good candidate for the Enlightenment Doctrine's martial arts. I was tempted and wanted to pass on my mantle to you." Ning Ke only then realized what he had missed back then. Yu Lian said, "Although you rejected me, I always felt that you would definitely walk on this path in the future. So I gave you this ID token before you went to the wilderness." Just as I expected, you met Lotus in the front gate and learned youngest uncle's great spirit, but you still joined the devil. Yu Lian looked at him and said, "Lotus wanted to pass on his mantle to me, but I rejected him. I wanted to pass on my mantle to you, but you also rejected me. Finally, you still inherited his mantle. It seems that there is no difference between us." Ning Ke could not help but feel a lot of emotions when he thought of the past. Then he smiled and said, "That's good. Otherwise I would be inferior to senior sister." Then he gradually stopped smiling and said, "Is it really fate? I once told you that as long as you start from your own heart, you can easily overcome it. This not only refers to the checkpoints on the way to the mountain, but also something like fate." Yu Lian said, "On the first day I met my teacher he told me this. He also said that I looked better as a girl and that I should accept him. So I put his words into practice on the spot and stepped on the hem of his black smock." Ning Ke asked, "And then?" Yu Lian said expressionlessly, "I didn't overcome it, but my teacher fell flat on his face." Ning Ke felt it was very exciting and asked, "How do you feel?" Yu Lian thought for a while and said, "I feel very good." Ning Ke asked, "Teacher wasn't angry?" "Since I'm a girl, I naturally have the right to throw a tantrum." Yu Lian's face was still expressionless. After a moment of silence, she continued, "I naturally understood later. I was very depressed at that time, and my teacher deliberately fell to make me happy." It was quiet on the city wall for a long time. Yu Lian looked down at Chang'an City and asked, "What problem did you see?" Under the current tense situation, no matter how shocking or nostalgic it was, it would not make Ning Ke and her waste so much time to discuss it. They were here to see the scenery. Yu Lian took him to see the scenery of Chang'an City. Ning Ke looked at the city that was more deserted than usual, looked at the wide and quiet streets, and said something very strange. "Chang'an City is a bit congested now." Yu Lian said, "Yes, the problem you need to solve now is this congested word." Ning Ke said, "It should be very difficult to solve this congested word." At this time, Chang'an City streets were wide and there were few people, and it was rare to see a few horse carriages. The traffic was very convenient and relaxed. There were no accidents caused by horse carriages colliding, and there were no groups of students who petitioned a few days ago. But Yu Lian and Ning Ke both saw the congested Chang'an City. They looked very serious. "I didn't wake up until almost 1 o'clock in the morning. I didn't dare to slack off, but I found that I really couldn't stand it anymore. I have blurred vision, shoulder pain, and hand cramps. But it's the last day. I have to be perfect. Let's continue. To be continued. If you like this work, please come to Chidien. Come to vote for me. Your support is my greatest motivation. Chapter 740. Yu Lian said, although Haotian Taoism is useless, they still have some tricks up their sleeves. They have been preparing for 1,000 years. Although they can't break the array left by the headmaster, they can't be underestimated. The hierarch entered the academy to grab the array eye pestle. He Mingqi must have done something in the city in the name of the South School of Haotian Taoism. Fortunately, the array eye pestle is still in our hands. Ning Ke was puzzled and asked, why didn't you kill He Mingqi? I have to guard the academy. Yen Sei is dead and the headmaster is gone. The God-stunning array will automatically activate. If I show my state before he does anything, I will have to fight with the vermilion bird to death even if I am not killed. Ning Ke thought of the stone statues on the Vermilion Bird Avenue and finally understood. When he fought with Xiahou Shuehu, so many powerhouses entered Chang'an. They were allowed to enter. Yu Lian glanced at the array eye pestle in his hand and said, now the array eye pestle is in your hand. You have to restore the array to its original state as soon as possible. Ning Ke could tell that senior sister was going to leave. He was a little surprised. He thought that Chang'an could not afford to leave a real powerhouse like senior sister, unless she was going to. Senior sister, are you going to the south? He asked. Yu Lian said, Junimo and the others are there. Why should I go there? Ning Ke thought about how terrifying the West Hill Divine Palace army from Qinghe Prefecture was. How could second brother stop them? He was even more worried when he thought of second brother's unyielding pride. Yu Lian said, it's no use worrying. I have to stay in Chang and because there is something important waiting to be done. So you have to finish it in 7 days. This thing referred to the restoration of the God-stunning array. But what was the important thing? Ning Ke felt a little heavy on his shoulders and asked, why 7 days? Yu Lian said, because eldest brother can only stall the Abbey Dean for 7 days. Ning Ke asked, then where are you going during these 7 days? What are you going to do? Yu Lian said, I'm going shopping. I haven't gone shopping for years. Ning Ke was speechless as he looked at the young girl walking down the stone steps. He looked at her bouncing youthfulness and the 2 black ponytails swaying behind her. After knowing that the third senior sister was the 23-year cicada cultivation realm, he had a very serious question, but he didn't dare to ask her. Should he call her third senior sister or third senior brother? At this time he was no longer confused, it was still third senior sister. It wasn't because she was young and pretty, it wasn't because she was jumping around, it wasn't because her black ponytail was swaying, it was because at this time she still wanted to go shopping. Yu Lian was really shopping. The chaos in Chang'an had just subsided. Traces of unwashed blood could still be seen on the streets and alleys. The ruins of the burnt mansions were even more striking. However, with the Empress's strong hand and the full cooperation of the court officials, the order had returned to normal. That history would never repeat itself. The people in the city silently waited for the final battle. Yu Lian was very satisfied with the quietness of the street and the opening of the shops. Or she was satisfied with the woman who made the city go back to normal as soon as possible. She went to Chenjinji Cosmetics store to buy a box of cosmetic powder and some sweet and sour food. Carrying large and small bags, she casually walked into the palace as if she was visiting a relative. Although the palace guards were vigilant, they didn't notice someone like the 23-year cicada cultivation realm. Now that the God-stunning array had some problems, the beasts on the eaves of the palace could only watch the petite girl carrying a lot of things through the imperial garden to the palace. The empress was not in the imperial study or the main hall. Instead, she was dealing with state affairs in her bedroom. She looked a little tired, but her expression was still firm. It was with this temperament that she could make the Tang Empire feel refreshed within half a day in such a chaotic situation and when most of the officials in the court were still hostile to her. The curtain in the hall moved slightly. The empress put her brush pen on the inkstone and looked out of the hall. She said in a low voice, "Who's hiding?" The eunuchs and maids who were serving her looked at each other. They didn't hear any footsteps at all. Was the empress so nervous and tired that she had an illusion? At this moment, a clear and dignified voice came from outside the hall. It was difficult for a clear and young voice to be dignified, but this voice did it. "It seems that you've had a good life after marrying that guy. You didn't even want to cultivate for a day. If you worked a little harder, you would have found out when I came to the imperial garden. You wouldn't have to wait until now. The curtain moved again and Yu Lian walked in with a lot of things. Compared with the pile of things, she looked even more petite. The Empress frowned slightly and asked, "Who are you?" Yu Lian ignored her. She threw the things on the ground and walked over with her hands behind her back. One put her hand down and the other put her hand behind her back. These two simple actions caused her aura to change greatly. As she walked, she gave off the feeling of a towering mountain as if she was a grandmaster. The determined look on the Empress's face turned into confusion, and then she suddenly became very weak as if she had gone back to many years ago. She was still a timid girl and her voice trembled slightly. "Are you, teacher?" 23 years cicada cultivation had several disciples when he was in the Devil's Doctrine. Those disciples were all older than him. One of them was the last saintess of the Devil's Doctrine, named Summer. She was the current empress of the Tang Empire. The empress didn't know that her teacher had been in the back of the mountain of the academy until today. She couldn't help but be surprised. His Majesty has a very close relationship with the academy. Why didn't he tell me? No one knows my real identity except for teacher, eldest brother, and Jun Mo. Your man naturally doesn't know either. Speaking of which, your man is really good. You didn't suffer a loss marrying him. Teacher, what can you do even if you suffer a loss? If you suffer a loss, even if I can't do anything, I can ask the headmaster of the academy to help. When His Majesty married me, the academy finally agreed. Did you help him? The academy never cares about marriage. I don't have to say anything and I won't object to your marriage. The long-separated teacher and disciple were talking, and the empress was serving tea and fruits humbly. But Yu Lian looked like a girl at this time and the scene looked a little weird. So when Tang Xiaotang walked into the bedroom with the sixth prince and saw this scene, she was immediately shocked. Yu Lian glanced at her and said, "No need to guess, it's me." Tang Xiaotang screamed and said, "Teacher, what's wrong with you?" The empress smiled and said, "No wonder Miss Xiaotang appeared and stayed with us after Ning Ke entered Chang'an. It was all arranged by you, teacher." Yu Lian said, "You two have officially met each other today. Greet each other." Tang Xiaotang stepped forward and bowed and the empress bowed back. The empress was silent for a long time. Finally she couldn't hold back her doubts, mainly because she was too shocked. She whispered, "Teacher, how did you change? I thought you could hold it back forever." Yu Lian said, "What's there to be interested in? I'm leaving." The empress was speechless. She thought, "You suddenly changed from a man to a woman. How can I not ask?" She stood up and walked Yu Lian to the door of the hall. Yu Lian carried a lot of things and said, "No need. It's not convenient for you to leave the palace." The empress thought, after all, the palace is different from home. I really can't send you out of the palace. She smiled and asked with concern, "Teacher, have you been happy these years?" "It's good to be peaceful. I can't find anything particularly happy. I only remember that one year," teacher explained the 23-year cicada cultivation to the disciples. His words were full of praise and I was very happy to hear it. Yu Lian was silent for a moment and said with a smile, "That night, I cooked a bowl of vegetable noodles for teacher." Ning Ke walked to the Chow Mansion on Spring Breeze Pavilion Street. After all, Li Huiyuan was killed by him. It would be inappropriate for him to stand in the court or sit behind the bead curtain like the empress. Therefore he was contacting the palace through the Chow Mansion. Earlier, the Fish Dragon Gang sent the latest news from the palace. The imperial court had ordered the Southern Army, which was heading north, to detour around Shao Mountain and turn southeast to Qinghe Prefecture. The last Yulin royal guards in Chang'an was also ready to go. They would leave the city at dusk and rush south overnight. Through this news, he confirmed that the empress had already known the news of the academy's action. The imperial court had begun to cooperate with them. He also felt that this arrangement was appropriate. The greatest danger that the Tang Empire was facing now came from three places. The Golden Palace from the wilderness to the south, the Divine Hall Coalition Army from West Hill and South Jin Kingdom to the north, and the Abbey Dean of Jishou Abbey, who could be called the most powerful person in the world after the headmaster left. Although the Golden Palace in the north was powerful, the Northern Army was almost at full strength with the Tang Army that Ning Ke and the Empress brought back from Helan City. The current situation seemed difficult and bloody, but they were on the Tang Empire's land and General Su Qi was in charge. As long as they could get through the difficult period at the beginning, they would be able to hold on in the end. When the situation was eased, they could even launch a counterattack. What really worried Ning Ke was the Abbey Dean of Jishou Abbey and the situation in the south. What kind of person was the Abbey Dean of Jishou Abbey? The West Hill Divine Palace Coalition Army was too powerful. There were more than 1,000 cultivators, but there was almost no soldier in the south of the Tang Empire. In the past years he had blind faith in eldest brother and second brother. However, in the current situation that faith had long disappeared. Especially in the south. Facing the mighty West Hill Divine Palace army, second brother had to hold on for 7 days. Because it would take the Southern Army and the Yulin Royal Guards 7 days to reach the south. Eldest brother could only hold on for 7 days, so he had to repair the big array of Chang'an City within 7 days. The final victory would be decided within 7 days. After 7 days. I'm really tired. This is the slowest speed in 3 days. But it seems to be getting better. I should write more energetically next. I've written this chapter for 7 days, it feels like I'm advertising for the Lien Sua Hotel. But I'm really a 7-day member. To be continued. If you like this work, please come to Chidian.com to vote for me. Your support is my biggest motivation. Chapter 741. There were 4 key points in the war against the Tang. 2 were in the light and 2 were in the dark. The 2 in the dark were arranged by Haotian Taoism. The 2 in the light were in the north and south of the map. The West Hill Divine Palace Hierarch's surprise attack on the academy failed miserably. The Abbey Dean of Jishou Abbey and eldest brother were still wandering around the famous mountains and rivers in the human world, but they would never forget to return. The fierce battle between the Golden Palace and the Tang Empire's cavalry was still going on in the north. So the battlefield that could change the stalemate and decide the outcome was in the south. The West Hill Divine Palace Coalition Army was the real main force in the war against the Tang Empire. After the Tang Empire's navy was destroyed, more than 8,000 papal cavalrymen, who had been secretly trained by the Divine Hall for many years, and more than 100,000 troops from the South Jin Kingdom crossed the Great Swamp and entered Qinghe County. In Qinghe County, the powerful cultivators and private armies of the warlords joined the coalition army. Troops from remote small countries and cultivation sects hidden in the mountains also gathered. The West Hill Divine Palace Coalition Army's momentum grew. They walked on the field, the autumn rice was broken and the paddy fields were trampled dry. Behind the 2 divine sedans, there were more and more carriages. The most eye-catching one was the quietest one. This was probably the most powerful army since the Tang Empire's northern expedition against the desolate Man Empire. Compared to today's coalition army, the coalition army that fought against the desolate man in the wilderness in spring was much weaker. At that time, the West Hill Divine Palace Coalition Army was personally led by the Hierarch Lord. However, anyone who could guess who was sitting in the quiet carriage thought that the person in the army was more awe-inspiring than the Hierarch Lord. One day in late autumn, the mighty West Hill Divine Palace Coalition Army passed through Qinghe County and came to a green mountain range. They stopped outside the Green Canyon in the mountains. More than a dozen scouts from the South Jin Kingdom galloped towards the verdant canyon. Not long after, there was a sharp sound of bamboo flutes indicating safety. The coalition army still did not move. The silence was terrifying. The Divine Hall Coalition Army only confirmed that there was no ambush by the Tang Army when the sound of the bamboo flute came from the depths of the verdant canyon and was about to disappear. The commander of the coalition army, marshaled by Haishin of the South Jin Kingdom, waved his hand indifferently. The messenger beside him held the flag in both hands and quickly waved it in front of him, conveying the military order to advance to the camps. According to the intelligence from the Tang Empire, the Divine Hall Coalition Army had confirmed that the Tang Empire could not find a single troop to defend the southern border. In the past, the Tang Empire's southern army had been guarding outside the primeval forest. Even if they ignored the invasion of the Golden Tribe Royal Court, they would have to go around the Shao Mountain to get here. Unless the southern army could fly, it was impossible for them to appear in the verdant canyon. Even so, marshaled by Haishin and the important figures of the deity's Templar remained vigilant and cautious. Now that the crushing momentum of the army had been established, they only needed to safely head north to conquer the world. There was really no need to take any risks. The cavalry of the South Jin Kingdom entered the canyon first, keeping a good distance between the battalions. Then the mixed infantry entered. Because the speed was strictly controlled, it took a long time. The reason for this was that the coalition army had to lengthen the formation of the cavalry in the canyon. This would make it easy for the Tang army to attack them together, but it was also good for the cavalry to adapt. If there was really the Tang army in the canyon, the Tang Empire would have to use at least 100,000 troops to defeat all the nearly 20,000 cavalry and infantry that had entered the canyon. The West Hill Divine Palace Coalition Army was precisely aware that the Tang Empire did not have so many troops. In the face of the mighty coalition army, the Tang army and guards in the valley did not exist. Even if there were the prefectural army from the north or the militia that gave the grassland cavalry a headache in the eastern border, they would not be able to do anything. The coalition army entered the canyon very slowly. It was so slow that many people in the camp were a little anxious. Some cultivators from some cultivation sects were even angry. However, some people still felt that it was too fast. It's too fast. Let the South Jin people slow down a little more. It was a sunny day with no clouds in the blue sky. The blazing sun did not feel like autumn at all. It penetrated the layers of gauze on the sacred sedan and fell on Yi Hongyu's eyebrows, making her look even more beautiful. The deacon in black beside the sedan received the order and left. After a while, he came back and reported respectfully in a low voice, "Great Divine Priest by Haishin, please rest assured. There are martial arts cultivators going up the mountain. According to the report, there should be no problem." Yi Hongyu frowned slightly. She knew that the coalition army was right. There were no loopholes in their plan and the Tang Empire could not find any chance. If they wanted to make the Verdant Canyon a graveyard to bury the army, even all the divine talisman masters in the world could not do it. It meant changing the world, and that was something that only Hao Yin could do. But she still felt that something was wrong. Because everything was too smooth and peaceful. She had lived in Chang'an for a long time. Apart from Ning Ke, who was an atypical Tangs, she had contact with many Tangs. She knew that the Tang Empire would never surrender. Therefore, this smoothness and peace revealed a bit of strangeness. As if to prove that her feeling was correct, the verdant canyon suddenly changed. Countless auras of heaven and earth gathered from all directions and condensed above the mountain. Yi Hongyu's expression suddenly froze. The great divine priest of revelation frowned deeply. There was a slight sound of surprise in the carriage. The three most powerful bigwigs in the West Hill Divine Palace Coalition Army were the first to feel the danger. But it was too late for them to do anything. Even if they could not change what was happening in front of them. The aura of heaven and earth above the verdant canyon fluctuated too violently, far beyond what cultivators could imagine. It was even comparable to the heaven-splitting sword of the headmaster in the wilderness. The amount of the aura of heaven and earth was so great that the streams in Qinghe Prefecture became turbid. Dewdrops condensed on the black roof tiles. Suddenly, a layer of cloud appeared in the sky above the green mountain. That piece of cloud violently twisted, unceasingly accumulating energy, and then suddenly turned into countless threats, dissipating in the blue sky, a power that did not belong to the human world, crushing towards the ground. There was a loud bang. The earth shook uneasily. Countless horses panicked and neighed. The verdant canyon collapsed. The West Hill Divine Palace Coalition Army had been guarding against the Tang Army or the cultivators of the Tang Empire in the verdant canyon. However, no one expected that it was not people who attacked. It was the verdant canyon itself that attacked. The beautiful verdant canyon became the most terrible place in the world. Countless plumes of smoke rose from the canyon and floated up to the blue sky. It was not a fire in the canyon, but the smoke and dust caused by the collapse of the cliff. It was easy to imagine the situation inside if the smoke and dust could float so high. Countless heavy rocks rolled down and landed on the heads of the South Jin Kingdom's cavalrymen, making a dull thundering sound. Then they continued rolling forward with blood and crushed corpses. The dull thunder-like sounds did not stop for a long time. The smoke and dust caused by the collapse of the canyon became more and more dense. Gradually, it became a large cloud of dust, covering the scene in the canyon. The screams of the South Jin soldiers came from the canyon. Their howls were drowned out by the sound of the cliff collapse. People outside the canyon could not hear them at all. They gradually weakened and then became dead silent. It had been a long time since the collapse of the verdant canyon. The rocks that were even larger than the carriages finally stopped rolling. The shaking plains also calmed down. The West Hill Divine Palace Coalition Army on the field of Qinghe Prefecture was silent. Everyone's face was full of shock and fear. Bai Haixin's face was extremely pale, and his hand holding the reins could not stop trembling. At this time, there were as many as 20,000 South Jin soldiers buried in the canyon. Although these losses could not change the strategic situation and did not fundamentally weaken the strength of the West Hill Divine Palace Coalition Army, it still pained him and he could not accept it. He was the commander-in-chief of the West Hill Divine Palace Coalition Army, but he was also the leader of the South Jin Army. The 20,000 soldiers under his command had died without even seeing the enemy. In the divine chariot, Yi Hongyu's eyelashes trembled slightly. Her expression became extremely solemn and even a little fearful. She forced herself to calm down and smoothed the wrinkled front of her divine robe of judgment. Her Taoist heart was firm and fearless. This kind of emotion should not have appeared on her, no matter how strong her opponent was. However, as she had thought, the collapse of such a long verdant canyon was many times more difficult than Jun Mo of the Academy cutting the Buddha statue in the Lank Temple. Only Hao Yin had the ability to change heaven and earth. How did the Tangs do it? Who was in that verdant canyon? What exactly happened in that canyon? Compared to the famous Min Mountain, the verdant mountains in the southern field of the Tang Empire were not as steep or towering. However, the surface of the mountains was hard and heavy granite, but most of the interior was limestone. It was very easy to dissolve in the rain, so landslides and rock collapses happened frequently. It was precisely because of this that the Green Mountains were transformed by nature in an exceptionally strange way. The peaks were steep and strangely shaped, making it extremely difficult to climb. Even martial arts cultivators regarded it as a dangerous path. Fortunately, there was a canyon in the mountains. This canyon connected the central area of the Tang Empire with Qinghe Prefecture. Otherwise, it would take many more days to make a detour. In order to strengthen its control over Qinghe Prefecture, the Tang Empire spent a lot of money to widen the canyon hundreds of years ago. Then, talisman masters and array tactical masters reinforced the cliffs on both sides of the canyon. They also planted trees with developed roots that could absorb water and strengthen the cliffs. Finally, the natural rugged road in the canyon became a smooth official road. From that day on, the Tang Empire became a road connecting the north and the south. People praised that with this strategic road, the Tang Empire and Qinghe Prefecture would never be separated. They would become a real family. Now, the warlords of Qinghe Prefecture rebelled and surrendered to the West Hill Divine Palace. They even sent their private army to join the attack on Chang'an. The country had been divided. Then what was the point of this verdant canyon? So let it collapse. Bury the past. The term verdant canyon has been in my mind for more than half a year. I've been thinking about it, but every time I think about it, I always think of Lin Qingxia. To be honest, I really don't think Sister Qingxia is as beautiful as many people say she is. Well, the reason why I'm saying this is because I'm really tired. Let's talk about it. There's more to come. To be continued. If you like this work, please come to Chidian.com to vote for me. Your support is my greatest motivation. Chapter 742. 2 years ago, Ning Ke took Sang Sang to the Lank Temple to see a doctor and passed by this verdant canyon. At that time, he thought that since there were countless tactical arrays and talismans set by predecessors in the canyon, if a strong enemy invaded from the south in the future, talisman masters only needed to dispel these talismans to collapse the verdant canyon. Even if tens of thousands of cavalry came, it would be difficult to pass through the verdant canyon and invade the heart of the Tang Empire in a short time. But he immediately denied this idea. Because even if Master Yensei came back to life, he could not mobilize so much qi of heaven and earth and trigger the talisman at the same time. As Yi Hongyu thought 2 years later outside the verdant canyon, this kind of earth-changing means was not achievable by human power. Unless the Tang Empire had already done something to these talismans when they opened up the canyon. Now the verdant canyon collapsed instantly, the shaking field that lasted for a long time, and the 20,000 soldiers of the South Jin Kingdom buried under countless boulders all proved Ning Ke's original judgment. Hundreds of years ago when the Tang Empire opened up the canyon, they did something and it was a big deal. They directly turned the canyon into a dead land and a tomb. Since the founding of the Tang Empire, they had been guarding against strong enemies from the south. The strong enemies here were not the warlords of Qinghe County, nor the self-proclaimed powerful South Jin Kingdom, but the West Hill Divine Palace. Countless resources and efforts, more than a dozen divine talisman masters, and finally designed by predecessors of the Academy, this important strategic passage was finally turned into an inhuman killing array by the Tang Empire. Then this killing array waited silently for hundreds of years and finally activated, becoming the last barrier of the Tang Empire in the south. If it were not for the large number of West Hill Divine Palace Coalition Army, which was far beyond the original design of the Academy, the length of the verdant canyon could directly bury the cultivators behind while swallowing the papal cavalrymen of West Hill. No one could survive the collapse of the verdant canyon except for those martial arts powerhouses. In the field outside the verdant canyon, the West Hill Divine Palace Coalition Army was dead silent, and their morale was extremely low. The great divine priest of Revelation looked at the green mountain that was still shrouded in dust and fog, and his expression was extremely solemn. Yi Hongyu's eyelashes fluttered a little faster. The two noble great divine priests of West Hill could not help thinking at this time. If they had entered the Verdant Canyon with the South Jin Kingdom cavalry, would they have survived? Even if they were lucky enough to survive, they would definitely be seriously injured and forced to leave the war against Tang. The methods of the Tang were far too vicious. In the Divine Hall Coalition Army, a voice suddenly rang out in the quiet carriage. Huang He Mu Chu. I'm sure they're in the mountain now. This is the significance of a divine talisman master to the war. If the old guy Yen Sei is still alive, the Tang Empire's odds of winning this time will at least increase by 1 point. There were 6 disciples of the sword Garrett beside the carriage. One of them had covered his eyes with a white cloth. It seemed that he had a bad eyesight, but he listened to his master's instruction respectfully. Thinking of the terrible scene he had seen, he thought that it was indeed the case. The blind disciple from the sword Garrett suddenly said, "The sage of calligraphy and his disciple are both divine talisman masters." The man said, "The whole world is against the Tang Empire, but the Great River Kingdom did not participate. The Divine Hall did not punish them for the time being, which is to give them some face. Of course, this master and disciple together are not worthy to be mentioned in the same breath as Yen Sei." The smoke and dust in the Verdant Canyon gradually covered the sky and the light dimmed. After entering the carriage, it became even darker. When the light fell on the eyebrows of the person in the carriage, it revealed a hidden injury under the skin. The hidden injury looked more like a handwriting. It was the handwriting of Master Yen Sei many years ago. There was only one person in the world who had a divine talisman drawn on his face by Master Yen Sei and was still alive. That person was Liu Bai. In the earth-shattering battle by the East Sea of the Kingdom of Song, Yen Sei erased half of Liu Bai's eyebrows, and Liu Bai pierced through Yen Sei's arm with his sword. It seemed that they were evenly matched, but in fact Liu Bai won. Liu Bai, the visiting professor of the Divine Hall who had been hidden for many years, the most powerful sage of sword in the world, finally came. Sure enough, he came. Huang He and Mu Chu are in the mountain now. Send someone to kill them. Yihong Yu said. If Liu Bai could think of this, so could the West Hill Divine Palace. The deacon of the judicial department said in a low voice. It could also be Ning Quebec. Yihong Yu said, that guy doesn't have this ability. The deacon in black took the order and left. Several martial arts powerhouses of the Divine Hall led a dozen papal cavalrymen and galloped toward the canyon. The Verdant Canyon was a killing array built by the Tang Empire with countless manpower. Even if the Divine Talisman Masters could activate the array, their psyche power would be exhausted. This was their weakest moment. Deep in the mountains, Professor Huang He and Professor Mu Chu, who had lived in seclusion for many years, were walking weakly toward the mountain peak with the help of several technical officials of the Ministry of Works. It was difficult to walk in the Green Mountain, so they could only temporarily hide in the fortifications set by the Tang Empire under a mountain peak. The martial arts powerhouses of the West Hill Divine Palace chased after them over the mountain, while the dozen papal cavalrymen galloped to the exit of the canyon, ready to clear the blocked entrance so that the Divine Talisman Masters could open the way later. The Divine Talisman Masters were the rarest resources in the world. Even big countries like the South Jin Kingdom and the Yueluan Kingdom did not have a Divine Talisman Master. In fact, most of the Divine Talisman Masters were in the Academy in Taoism. The Academy had Divine Talisman Masters, and so did the West Hill Divine Palace. The great Divine Priest of Revelation's peaceful voice came from the sacred sedan. Senior brothers, thank you very much. An old voice rang out from a luxurious carriage. The Academy and the Divine Hall have always been equal in Talisman Taoism. But after the death of senior brother Yen Sei, we are not as good as them. It is easy to destroy but difficult to build. It will take some time to open a passage. The great Divine Priest of Revelation said, we only need a small path to pass. The Divine Talisman Master said, why not let the army take a detour? The great Divine Priest of Revelation said, we don't have time. There was silence. The Divine Talisman Master said, then the 4 of us will die here. After a moment of silence, the great Divine Priest of Revelation said, Haotian will definitely praise you for your virtues. I will reunite with you in the Divine Kingdom in a few days. While the West Hill Divine Palace was thinking about how to reopen the Verdant Canyon, the dozen papal cavalrymen responsible for the early cleaning work had arrived at the entrance of the canyon and rode into the dust. A moment later, a whistling sound was heard. A papal cavalryman was shaken out of the dust and fell from a high place like a piece of earth. He fell heavily to the ground and died with broken bones. Then the whistling sound was heard. More than a dozen papal cavalrymen who entered the exit of the Verdant Canyon were all shaken out and fell to the hard ground, making muffled sounds. They all fell to their deaths. Then, several martial arts masters who had chased the divine talisman master of the academy over the mountain also turned into corpses and were shaken out. The ground outside the Verdant Canyon was covered with blood and corpses. The West Hill Divine Palace Coalition army was shocked by this strange scene. Everyone looked at the entrance of the canyon. The exit of the Verdant Canyon was still full of dust and was extremely dark. It was like the thickest fog in winter or the wettest clouds in summer. It poured out of the canyon like night and filled the field. Suddenly, a melodious sound of a zither sounded in the dust. A moment later, a low sound of a flute joined in. Someone sang along with the sound of the zither and flute. The bright moon rises above the mountains between the boundless sea of clouds. The wind blows tens of thousands of miles, blowing across the Nanyang Pass. Heaven blocks the way of the human world. People peep at the bend of the Sisui River. From the battlefield, no one returns. The song was not euphemistic, but flat and straight, repeating these sentences. The bright moon rises above the mountains. The wind blows tens of thousands of miles. The heaven blocks the way of the human world. From the battlefield, no one returns. From the battlefield, no one returns. The song echoed in the field. The simple words were sung with the magnificence of the bright moon shining on the battlefield. The song was melodious and gentle, but it was played with a heroic murderous aura. A tall crown appeared amidst the night dust and sand. The night lost its color. A man with a high hat and a broad belt slowly walked out of the sandstorm. His hands were naturally behind his back, and his wide sleeves hung down like clouds. He looked serious and upright, and his bearing was impeccable. Every step he took was carefully taken, so the distance of each step was exactly the same. A beautiful woman in a pomegranate red dress followed the man out. She held an embroidery frame in her hand and carried a bag on her shoulder. She looked curiously at the mighty army opposite. It was the seventh sister of the academy, Muyu. Bagong Weiyang walked out with a zither in his arms, his right fingers stroking the strings from time to time. Shiman Buho walked out with a flute in his hand, frowning deeply. The fourth brother followed behind with a sand table in his hand, frowning from time to time. He did not like the music to affect his calculation. Walking at the back was the sixth senior brother, who carried a load on his shoulder. At one end of the pole was a burning iron stove, and at the other end was a heavy cabinet. Judging from the bending of the pole, there must be a lot of things in the cabinet. The man who walked out of the mountains like the bright moon, illuminating the dark field. Of course, it was the second brother of the academy. This chapter is about 2,800 words, so I can only stop here. The disciples of the academy walk out of the Verdant Canyon. I have been waiting for this scene for half a year. I thought I could stimulate myself, but I really can't. I have to lie down for a while and right after I get up. It's the last 3 hours. I need the monthly vote. To be continued. If you like this work, please come to Chidian. Come to vote for me. Your support is my greatest motivation. Chapter 743. In Ning Kei's previous deduction, even if the Verdant Canyon collapsed and the mountains blocked the enemy, a simple road was needed in the war. The strong enemy who had the courage and strength to attack the Tang Empire would definitely have enough array tactical masters, talisman masters, and even divine talisman masters. They could definitely forcibly break open a road for the cavalry. Therefore, a peerless powerhouse was needed to guard the exit of the Verdant Canyon. That powerhouse had to be strong enough to kill Buddhas, demons, and Taoist priests. Moreover, he could not rest, sleep, eat, or drink. He might even have to fight with the enemy powerhouses for 3 days and 3 nights. Ning Kei could not help laughing when he thought of these words. He thought that there was no such a powerful person in the world. Even if there was, how could such a powerful person be stupid enough to put himself in a situation where he would definitely die? Note 1. However, no one could have imagined that the world would always change so unexpectedly. 2 years passed and the third autumn came. The Tang Empire, which had once dominated the world, became a broken boat in the ocean. The Verdant Canyon became the place that the Tang Empire had to hold on to. Even Ning Kei was willing to be that stupid person. Second brother, Junimo, came to be that person. He brought the younger brothers and sisters from the back of the mountain of the academy. He frowned slightly and looked behind him. The sound of the zither and flute stopped abruptly. Where is Wang Qi? Bagong Weiyang and Shiman Buhua looked at each other and said confusedly, he was here earlier. In the sandstorm, a person stumbled out. It was Wang Qi, who ranked 11th in the back of the mountain of the academy. He held a few blades of grass in his hand, a few fruits in his arms, and an unknown wildflower in his mouth. "Where have you been?" Seventh sister took the things in his arms and reprimanded him. "You knew that the most important thing was to show up." Note 2. Wang Qi was sweating and said, "Many of the herbs were buried and some can only be found here. What if they are extinct?" The sandstorm gradually subsided. The autumn sun was blazing again, and there was no cloud in the blue sky. The field outside the verdant canyon was clear. The old voice of the great divine priest of revelation came from afar. "Even the headmaster of the academy can't go against heaven, let alone you disciples." The second brother said, "Master fights against heaven, so we, the disciples, fight against the human world. It's still unknown whether heaven can be defied. As for the outcome of the battle between us, we'll know soon." The great divine priest of revelation said, "The army of the divine hall is here. How can you stop them?" Second senior brother did not answer his question directly and only said one sentence. "Tang attack." Yi Hongyu raised her eyebrows slightly and pointed a finger at a blade that pierced through the veil from the outside of the sacred sedan. With a crack, the blade shattered and scattered. One of the papal cavalrymen holding the blade was shocked to death. A deacon of the judicial department silently sneaked into the curtain from the back of the sacred chariot with a poisoned black dagger and stabbed it at her lower back. As long as the tip of the dagger could pierce a little of her skin, it would be enough. Yi Hongyu did not turn around, nor did she attack. A cold star suddenly appeared in the depths of her eyes. Her black hair flowed behind her like a waterfall and hit the face of the deacon in black. The great divine priest of revelation also encountered several waves of assassination. Cheng Lishue, who was serving in the sacred chariot, was almost injured. However, these assassins could not succeed in front of the great divine priest and died one after another. Several papal cavalrymen of the divine hall took out their spears at the same time and stabbed into the carriage. However, before the spears could touch the walls of the carriage, they were killed by 5 flying swords. When the second brother said that the Tang should attack, there were at least dozens of assassinations in the West Hill Divine Palace Coalition Army. Hundreds of priests, deacons, and military officers of the Yen Kingdom attacked the most important people around them. A general of the Yen Kingdom died tragically under the blades of his trusted bodyguards. These were not the key points. These hundreds of Tangs who had been lurking in foreign countries for many years did not hesitate to reveal their identities and cause chaos in the coalition army just to cover the most important actions. Talisman masters were the weakest cultivators, and divine talisman masters were naturally even weaker. Professor Huang he had to go to the south for several months every year to recuperate, and Professor Mu Qin took medicine all year round. People like Master Yensei were really talented and could not be judged by common sense. On the battlefield, the Divine Talisman Master was the most feared figure. Therefore, the Divine Talisman Master became the target that the enemy wanted to assassinate the most. Correspondingly, the protection of the Divine Talisman Master was also the tightest. The West Hill Divine Palace Coalition Army protected the 4 Divine Talisman Masters very closely. They were not far from the sacred chariot of the 2 great divine priests and were heavily protected. However, no matter how cautious they were, no one could have predicted this situation. Who had ever seen the scene of hundreds of assassins suddenly attacking at the same time on the battlefield? Who would have thought that the most loyal bodyguards would suddenly become the most ruthless assassins? The scene was very cold, very hard. It was even more spectacular than the charge of thousands of cavalry. A carriage was set on fire. A carriage was shot into a scarecrow. A carriage was pierced with countless holes by spears. The blood that flowed out was black. No one could have predicted this situation. Even Yi Hongyu had no time to react. 3 divine talisman masters died in the fatal assassination of the Tangs. Only one divine talisman master was saved by the most powerful sword in the world. The assassination, or more accurately, the rebellion in front of the battle, was soon quelled. The field was dyed red with blood. Most of the dead were rebels. Now it could be confirmed that they were all Tangs. Yi Hongyu's face was slightly cold. The great divine priest of revelation had a very complicated expression. He looked at the people of the academy at the exit of the verdant canyon in the distance and said, "This is really an unexpected situation." Second brother looked calm. Even if hundreds of Tangs were killed in the enemy camp, he was still calm. He said, "For thousands of years, your Haotian Taoism has buried countless people in the Tang Empire. Naturally, the Tang Empire has also hidden countless people in the West Hill and other countries." The great divine priest of revelation said, "These people are either from the Imperial Center Administration, the Secret Guards, or the Southern Gate Temple. They don't know each other. How did you contact them in advance and set up this trap? Second brother said, there is no need to contact them in advance or organize them. They know that they are Tangs and they have a plan. They know that today's battle is the key to the survival of the Tang Empire. I said the Tangs will do it. They will do it. They are like the Verdant Canyon, the accumulation of the Tang Empire for thousands of years. They exchanged 20,000 cavalrymen and 3 divine talisman masters. That's enough. Although they are all dead, they are worth it. It was a very calm sentence, but it was as hard, cold, and spectacular as the assassination that had just ended. Now the situation is simple. If you want to pass through the Verdant Canyon, you have to defeat me. Second brother said calmly and then opened his arms. Seventh sister walked behind him and untied his coat, revealing the close-fitting plain clothes. Beigong Weiyang carried his zither and Shimin Buhua carried his bamboo flute. They walked to second brother's side and helped sixth brother put on the heavy armor carefully. Fourth brother looked at the complicated lines on the sand table and said, "Senior brother may die." Second brother's expression did not change. He said, "Everyone will die." Fourth brother looked at the changing lines on the sand table and said, "He may not die." Seventh sister held second brother's coat and glared at him. She said, "Senior brother is wearing your strongest armor. How could he die?" The fourth brother was a bit sad and said, "Su Shi is wearing the armor made by me and the sixth brother." Seventh sister said anxiously, "At this time, don't you know how to say something auspicious?" Fourth brother said calmly, "This is the secret of heaven." Seventh sister said, "Do you still believe in heaven?" Fourth brother was silent for a moment and then laughed. He reached out to brush off the lines on the sand table. Sixth brother tidied up the details of second brother's armor. Shimin Buhua looked at Beigong Weiyang and said, "Senior brother, I usually play the zither and you play the bamboo flute. Why is it the other way around today?" Beigong Weiyang said, "The zither is a sacred object. I am the senior brother, so of course I should play it." Shimin Buhua sighed and raised the bamboo flute to play. The sound of sobbing gradually rose. Seventh sister was really angry this time. "Who are you playing morning music for?" Shimin Buhua's expression suddenly changed and he quickly changed the tune. Beigong Weiyang sat on the ground and began to play the zither. The elegant music gradually rose. It was neutral and peaceful, with a magnificent mind and the bearing of the sea. In the sound of the zither and bamboo flute, second brother in armor walked forward with a heroic spirit. He held the iron sword in his hand and pointed to the hundreds of thousands of enemies in the south. "Come and fight." Note 1. These 2 paragraphs are copied from the chapter in the 3rd volume. Note 2. The appearance is the most important. This is what I wanted to say. I was so confused that I forgot an important role. Note 3. This is the last chapter for this year and for today. I wish everyone a happy new year in advance. I really can't write anymore. I've said countless truths in my life and countless lies that seem like the truth. But none of them are as sincere and truthful as this one. Thank you everyone for your love over the years. If you can still sit still and not talk nonsense later, then there will be a separate chapter. It will run through to the end, from the beginning to the end of the year. The last 40 minutes will require a monthly vote. To be continued. If you like this work, you are welcome to vote for it and vote for it. Your support is my biggest motivation. Chapter 744. In May, I said that the monthly votes champion was the greatest honor in the online literature industry. I didn't get it back then, but everyone helped me get it. I said that I was satisfied because at that time, I didn't even think about the annual votes champion. Everyone knows me, but I really didn't think about it because I've always been more focused on living a happy life. Let's not talk about the specifics of this matter. In any case, everyone was kind and generous, and I really wanted to fight unbridledly when I was middle-aged and grab the last tale of my youth. Thus, we joined this battle together and walked all the way until now, until we obtained the final victory. This time, I can calmly and confidently say that we have won the greatest honor in the online literature industry. We are the Grand Slam and we are worthy of pride. I will still shout that I'm tired, but I won't go into the specifics because I'm too tired to type those words. I can only say that I'm really King tired. I've never been so tired in my life. But just like what second senior brother said, it's enough, it's worth it. The first day there were nearly 10,000 votes. In the end, including Jiang Yi, all the books I wrote on Qidian were pushed to the top, and I was able to get the monthly votes prize. This isn't a problem with the prize money, this is something that has never happened before. This really shocked me, shocked many people. What else can I say? Other than thanking you, I'm amazed at your strength. You are too strong, second only to me. Does anyone want to slap me for saying that? Next, I'm going to write a very cliched thank you speech. Please read it carefully. I rarely do this in the past, but this time I'm doing it. I suddenly understand the feelings of those celebrities who refuse to step down from the stage during award ceremonies. Thank you for subscribing to my original books. I've always insisted that subscribing is the calmest and most certain connection between you and me. Thank you for voting for the monthly votes. Thank you for subscribing to books everywhere in exchange for monthly votes. Thank you for switching accounts with other readers in exchange for more votes. Thank you for not subscribing to the original books yet, but for voting for the precious monthly votes. I rarely thank you because I'm too embarrassed to thank you. Thank you for writing many good book reviews. Thank you for helping me promote everywhere. Thank you for tolerating my laziness. Thank you for all of you. Thank you for my parents. Without them there wouldn't be me. Without me there wouldn't be Jiang Yi. Without Jiang Yi there wouldn't be this monthly votes champion. Thank you for my in-laws. Thank you for my in-laws. Thank you for going online often to see how many votes there were. Thank you for cooking dumplings for me. Thank you for fixing the furniture himself. Thank you for cleaning the cat and dog toilet on the balcony. Why does it feel so official? Thank you to Hai Tang, thank you to Teacher Jiang, Teacher Bai, and Master Wang. Thank you to Lin Hai, Bing Dregs, Butterfly Blue, Xiao Ding, and Guanyu who chatted with me in the group when I couldn't write anymore. Of course, the most important thing is spelling. Thank you to Xiao Hua, Sandbag, Feng Ling, and many others who always spelled until late at night with me. That's right. Even if we fought to the death for the last 3 days, Feng Ling and I still met each other late at night without saying anything. Thank you to all the girls who sent me photos when I couldn't write anything. Thank you to all the girls and men who wrote countless good book reviews in the book review section, Tieba and Weibo. Thank you to the editors of Team 2. Thank you to the editors of other groups. Why do I feel that all the editors and I are quite good? In that case, I won't list them. Thank you to everyone in Chidian. There must be a lot of things I missed out on. Please forgive me. But there are definitely some people who won't forget to thank me. Thank you to Cloud, Thread, Karaoke, Drunk Black, Surfing the Net, Elon, and in Dizzy, Pomelo, and Gossip Fish and his wife who I haven't seen in a long time. Thank you for your hard work. I don't know how to put it. Managing the forum is really troublesome. There are so many trivial things. The management of the various QQ groups is also very troublesome. I've always been a hands-off manager. I don't care about anything but I've troubled them. The rankings, the popularity of the book review section, these things I don't understand. It's really tough. Although sometimes I really want to fight with Cloud, I still thank him. If there's a chance, everyone let's drink. I suddenly thought of something. Regarding He Kai-tu, I actually knew a long time ago that he read my novel. He didn't see it through at me, but I accidentally saw it one day when I was browsing through his blog. It's just that I'm a slut, so I'm unreasonable. Just like when Prince Ma praised the Vermilion Bird story, I had to pretend to be calm. This is different from when other celebrities read my novel. This is because Prince Ma is the author I love. I really like to read the fragments of Keido's novels. This feels more like Zhang Liangying suddenly appearing in front of me and wanting to sing karaoke with me. Then she looks at me with deep emotions and says that I sing really well, even though my breathing is a little weak. Alright, I almost forgot to thank student Mojibai. I'm a person with a relatively bad memory. Although I've written countless notes, I can't understand the characters that are going to appear in the night. I have to thank him for making so many character lists. My mind is really not clear and I'm talking all over the place. I'll take advantage of my last breath to say a few more things. Some readers said that I made him happy. Actually, you guys are the ones who made me happy. The happiness of being together is a harmonious society. If a CCTV reporter were to ask me, "Are you happy?" How do you think I would answer her? I would do the same as the words I wrote just now, without any glib tone, no coloratura soprano and little fun simultaneous words. I would tell her very seriously that I'm very happy. Why did I write about her? What problem did this expose in my subconscious? Is there anything that I'm not happy about? On the day of the 14th chapter, there were actually readers urging me to update. Later, I suddenly realized that this meant that my writing was not bad, and it attracted readers to read it. Also, this month I was also said that I'm not good at writing. A friend named CC leaning on the railing told me that if people don't know about it, aren't you a gentleman? I thought about it and felt that it was right. I'm grateful, but it's hard to do it sincerely. My personal cultivation still needs to be improved. As for the details of the battle in the academy yesterday, a friend on Weibo summarized it very well. From hungry, thirsty, stay up all night dash, Ning Kei's cultivation is not good enough and his arrow missed. Elder Su Shi's cultivation is not good enough, and his sword missed. Third brother roared, "Bears come and go. Come and fight with Grandpa." Bears was ashamed and angry. He leaped up and punched Yu Lian's knee heavily. He cried, "Since I was born, why did I give birth to a bear?" Bears looked up to the sky and roared, "Hao Yin, please give me strength." Third brother sneered, "I'll destroy you on behalf of the moon." These days I'm really happy with these plots, or else I wouldn't have written so much. It's all hard, all good. Where did I write? Forget it, I won't write anymore. Anyway, thank you. As everyone can guess, I'm going to lie down for a few days. 3 days, let me lie down for 3 days. Then I'll continue to write. I said that I'll write for the rest of my life. Because I'm afraid of being forgotten. I think the last few days of 2012, it's probably hard for me or you to forget. This is really good. Goodbye. Happy New Year. I wish you happiness. To be continued. If you like this work, please come to Chidian.com to vote for it. Your support is my biggest motivation. To be continued. If you like this work, please come to Chidian.com to vote for it. Your support is my biggest motivation. You're tuning in to the Han Li's Wuxia Adventures YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support, and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.